Hi, it's Rob Bowron with Sharp College Football, and geez, I keep messing with this. About there, that works. Anyway, I'm excited. It's quite late. It's right before the first real Saturday of college football, which means games have already happened on, Thursday, which was yesterday, and Friday, and are currently happening Fridays today. I'm way behind on getting previews out, but we did get some really exciting interviews in, so I do want to knock these out and get these out into the ether. We got Nicole Auerbach of NBC Sports to join us and help preview the Big Ten. I think we had a fantastic interview with her. I'm really excited to get through and cover this. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm the econometrician chicken behind BetaRank, an advanced stats system for college football. It's built on data that's provided by the same folks that provide data to the College Football Playoff Committee. This is an advanced stats preview. We are going to talk a bit, particularly in the interview, much more about like who's on the teams, that kind of thing. But for the most part, this is going to be from an advanced stats perspective. I don't know. Don't reply with counting stats, like per game stats, that kind of thing. For the most part, those aren't interesting. We're going to try to take a little bit of a deeper dive on the math. Everything you see here is control, like out of BetaRank, is controlling for opponent, field position, state of the game, before we end up with the numbers. Anyway, please reach out with any questions, put them in the comments, that kind of thing. I'm really excited to cover the Big Ten. These take a while. We do 5 minutes per team in the coverage. Given the number of teams in the super conferences, it can take a bit. So I will put in chapters so that you can kind of skip to what you want to see. But let's go ahead and get started because, like I said, it does take a little bit. So, all right, 5 minutes per team. Let's start with Illinois. Brent Bielema, of course, is your head coach. We've got him projected at 60 overall, which is not great. I mean, they were at 56 and 23. So we've got them kind of hanging around in the same area where they finished last season. But they were at 20 and 22. That was, of course, when Ryan Walters was their defensive coordinator. They had a terrific defense in 22. They've definitely taken a step back defensively. Last year, they were at 41 overall on offense. That's an okay Power 4 defense or offense now. I guess there's 68 Power 4 teams. So this is this number 4 or 41 number puts you kind of on the wrong side of the middle. Barry Lunny Jr. is your offensive coordinator. Aaron Henry is your defensive coordinator. They, of course, took a massive step back last year on defense in particular, following for number 2 overall on defense and number 73 overall on defense. Some of that's the coordinator change. Some of that, of course, is, players matriculating. Special teams wasn't great. Number 59 overall. That's something they're going to have to clean up as well. They don't have a ton coming back on the offensive side of the football. These returning production numbers are from Bill Connolly at ESPN. That's not a ton coming back on this side of the ball. Returning production is more correlated with offensive production the next season than it is defensive. I mean, it still matters for the defense. Defensive, they have a bit more coming back. That is some potential hope for improvement on the defensive side of the ball, that they can potentially get better. On coaching and development, they sit at number 82 overall. Illinois has not done a terrific job over the last couple of years relative to their recruiting, really producing good football. They're sitting at number 43 overall in their 2-year rolling recruiting ranking. Sitting at 60 tells me you're underperforming at least a little bit, and you're certainly not beating it. Offensively last season, they were not terrible at drive efficiency. That's an okay number. They were reasonably able to sustain long drives to be able to put up points. We switched up to the radar charts up top here. On explosive drives, they were pretty good. Again, it's not a massive number. They're a little bit better on explosive drives. One of the big differentiators between really good offenses or extremely good offenses, though, is the drive efficiency number. Play efficiency, this is their ability to generate yards per play outside of explosives. This is a decent number here. It's the least important of the core 4 BetaRank metrics. Negative drives, this is another one they could really improve on. Too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. They need to clean this up a little bit. They were not great running the football. to put it mildly. They were definitely a better passing team. This is something they're going to have to clean up too. They're just going to have to become a little bit more. They need to lean into throwing the ball a little bit more. We're going to see. They did play last night against an FCS opponent. Mileage is going to vary significantly when you're playing FCS teams, so I don't even pay attention to those games. And frankly, unless they lose, neither should you, unless you're a fan of that team. And Altmaier was pretty good. Like Altmaier's their quarterback, 64.8% completion percentage, 7.0 per. His completion numbers where you want it. You'd like to see him get the ball down the field a little bit more. Defensively, they were decent in drive efficiency. They did find ways to get off the field and avoid giving up big plays, avoid giving up long drives, but they did give up some big plays. That explosive drives number is something they're going to have to clean up coming into next year. Play efficiency was pretty good. Their negative drives was also a pretty good number for them. It really might come down to them just being able to limit big plays coming into this season. They didn't have a huge run pass split, but they were definitely better defending the pass than they were against the run. That's something to keep an eye on. They're going to need to clean this up. Counting the FCS game, we've got them projected at about 5.5 wins, 5.35 wins. This Kansas game at home is going to be a really interesting one. We don't have Kansas projected to be an amazing team coming into this season. I think the offense has a chance to really click. They do have a new offensive coordinator in place, however, so that's something to keep an eye on. Jalen Daniels is, of course, back, but the defense has not been very good for Kansas. This is going to be a good test to tell us exactly where the Illinois defense is, though, this season. Central Michigan, again, is a game that they should win going away. Nebraska is going to be a tough game for them. Nebraska, offensively, I do expect them to improve with the new quarterback, but I'm not expecting massive things. I'm not a big believer in their offensive coordinator. We'll get to that. But the defense has been really good. This should be a game where we get a really good idea of where Illinois' offense is going to be, because I do think that Tony White and Matt Rule have this Nebraska defense headed very much in the right direction. This might be a game that we kind of have it as close to a toss-up. It'll be an interesting one. A game that Illinois might need to win. Penn State, should be a really tough game for them. It is on the road. Penn State did get Kansas's offensive coordinator, which is something to keep an eye on for them. Defensively, I'm interested to see if they hold up, but this should, like I said, this should be a tough game. I think even if Penn State falls below where these expectations have them, Illinois is probably going to finish like +3 or +4 on turnovers in order to hang in this game. Purdue is a little bit of a closer game for them. But Illinois, again, they're going to have to take a step forward, particularly defensively. I don't know that Purdue is we're not projecting them to be really good, but we are projecting them to be better here, and the game is on the road. Michigan, this should be a game that Illinois is going to have a really tough time in, even though Michigan's not, what they were last year. Still going to need probably 2 or 3 turnovers. Oregon away is just a brutal matchup. Just good luck on that one. Try to run the ball a lot, keep the clock moving. Minnesota's struggled last night. They already lost a game to North Carolina. This feels like a game that a lot of Illinois fans after that are going to have circled and be expecting to win. But you're starting to enter a stretch of the season where Illinois is going to need to come probably away with at least 3 wins if they'd like to get to bowl eligibility. Michigan State's a team that's rebuilding. I like Jonathan Smith. They could be more dangerous by the time they get to hear Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren, a really good offensive combo. I like the defensive coordinator hire too. Rutgers, I feel like people are overrating a little bit coming into this season. I think that we'll see where Rutgers shakes out. I think the defense could potentially be better. The offense has been pretty bad. Northwestern's a really interesting one to me. I like the Zach Lujan hire at offensive coordinator, but it feels like they're still a little bit away. But this, again, it projects to be a pretty tight game for Illinois. We're over the 5 minutes, unsurprisingly. All right, Indiana. In steps the new head coach. We've got them projected at 70 overall. Kurt Signetti's your new coach, comes over from James Madison. Am I spacing that? Anyway. Wait, is it? I'll have to look that back up. Anyway, if it's not, put it in the comments. Tell me I'm an idiot. They've struggled of late under Tom Allen. Tom Allen had a really, really good coaching staff for a hot minute with Kane Womack at DC and Kalen DeBoer as offensive coordinator. And for a bright, shining moment, Indiana was like a meteor across the sky. And they've really fallen off considerably since then. Offensively, last season, they were at 70 overall. They really struggled. Mike Shanahan, not that Mike Shanahan, of course, is your offensive coordinator, came with Signetti from the prior job. Bryant Haynes is your defensive coordinator. They really struggled defensively. Both of these are really bad numbers. I mean, that's a very bad Power 5 offense. That's an extremely bad, I mean, we should say Power 4 defense. Special teams were also really bad. They were at 85 in last season in 23, so we are projecting some improvement, but they were at 81 in 22. I mean, Tom Allen definitely saw this coming. They don't return a ton. I mean, these are decent numbers. They return a decent amount on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. That's part of why we have them projected to be better than they have been the last 2 seasons. Coaching and development has not been great. Again, like they've underperformed their recruiting rankings by a pretty significant margin. That's going to hurt. On the offensive side here, they struggled with drive efficiency. They just couldn't put together long drives to be able to find points. Just play calling and execution were a problem. Their explosive drives number also wasn't great. They need to improve both of these numbers. Negative drives, too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. They weren't particularly good at running the ball or throwing the ball. They were a bit better at throwing the ball last season. That's something to keep an eye on. It's likely to be Curtis Rourke of Ohio, the transfer in, who was good at Ohio and a ton of fun in MAC play. 63.5% completion percentage, 7.2 per. They're gonna have to either running the ball or throwing it in this new offense. They're just gonna have to find a way to get some big plays and sustain some drives and keep things going. Defensively, last season, they were okay at it's like at their drive efficiency, finding ways to use the field to their advantage, not give up points. Big problem, though, was in explosive drives, too many big plays. Need to find a way to limit that coming into this year. They were okay at negative drives, forcing 3-and-outs and forcing turnovers. They were better against the run than they were against the pass, so that's something to keep an eye on coming into this season. Can they improve their pass defense? I think is an open question. We've got them projected at about 5 wins, just under that, 4.88 when you count in the FCS game. The schedule gets interesting pretty quick. Florida Atlantic, that's a game they should walk away with the win with, of course. UCLA is a mystery coming into this season. We've got them projected at 32, but they probably lose the best defensive player in college football coming off of last year, as well as their defensive coordinator, as well as their head coach. Big open question that is the UCLA Bruins coming into this season. We probably have them over projected a bit. This game is probably closer to 7 points, but UCLA should still be a favorite. They have the better roster. They likely have the better coaching staff too. Charlotte is a team that is mired in lots of trouble, also mired in injuries coming into the kickoff in this season. Again, Indiana should be a heavy favorite there in this game. This should put them at 3-1 in all likelihood after this game. Maryland is a game and now we started to get into some games where you're going to be an underdog, but it's not by a lot. You're really hoping, if you're an Indiana fan, that you can come away with a win in one of these outright, maybe get lucky in another. This Maryland team loses a lot off of the team from last season, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. We talked a lot about Northwestern being kind of interesting. I'm interested to see where they are. I'm interested to see if the offense can get going a little bit, but I don't know that it's necessarily their year to take a big step forward. Nebraska, again, we talked about. I'm not massively sold on where the offense is going to be, but I think the defense is going to be in a really good spot. This is going to be a tough game for the Indiana offense unless they've taken a really big step forward. This could be a tough one. Washington is a game Washington, we've got them projected right in the middle-ish, maybe the sunny side of the middle on the Power 4. They lose a ton. I like Jed Fish as an offensive play caller. The cupboard's pretty bare on the offensive line. Washington's going to have some personnel issues this year, and I'm sure they just don't have the depth. But they still should be a pretty heavy favorite over Indiana. Michigan State, we talked about. This game projects to be pretty tight. Later in the season in particular, I like Jonathan Smith to have things pretty buttoned up as far as this team goes, and they're probably beating this projection at 63. I'm not saying that they're some gangbusters team, but they might be in the high 40s, and that would be a win for them in this first season, I think. And then it gets a lot tougher. you get a game against Michigan and a game against Ohio State. You're going to need a ton of turnovers to hang in those games. But I mean, truly, like, you only have 2 brutally tough games here in the Big Ten. You managed to miss Oregon. You managed to miss Penn State. That's not the worst. You also then get Purdue, a game again. Like, if you're an Indiana fan, you're really hoping, maybe the team beats this projection. Maybe Purdue's a little worse than their projection. Maybe you get some turnovers and maybe you get lucky and end up in a bowl game. Whoops. Timer. There we go. So, the Iowa Hawkeyes, man, Kirk Ferentz and no Ferentz the Younger for the first time in a while, which is, of course, like a lot of topic of conversation. Anyway, we've got them projected at 29 overall. We are, of course, projecting them to improve on this terrible offensive number, 122 in beta rank on offense last season. Number 3 overall, Phil Parker's your defensive coordinator, one of the best in the business. Like, putting together a number 3 defense, given where Iowa recruits, is a phenomenal job. His back must be very sore from carrying Kirk Ferentz as kid around for a long time. I'm sure he is looking forward to Tim Brewster taking over the offensive coordinator duties. Brewster's not the hire I would have made. It's shocking to me that they also interviewed Kevin Johns, who did a pretty good job at Duke last year, but didn't hire him. But it is Kirk Ferentz, so baby steps. Baby steps into the forward pass. Special teams actually were not great last season, and I know there's a lot of focus on like the punter, but like punting counts for a lot less than field goal kicking in advanced stats for special teams. The reason being that in college football, being able to hit field goals matters a lot. It's not the NFL where all the kickers are pretty much even quality. College football, having a good kicker matters. If you have somebody that misses, it's going to count a lot against you. Those points, those actual points tend to matter a lot more than a few yards here or there in field position. They return a good amount on the offensive side of the football. That's part of why we have them projected to potentially improve. We've got them with a ton returning on the defensive side of the football. That's another reason we have them projected to potentially improve. They were at 51 last season, so this would be a significant improvement. 39 and 22. Some of the wins, I mean, they do have a pretty favorable schedule, I would say, again, this season, but some of the wins have come over the last couple of seasons when the offense has been horrendous. They've also still been able to play a Big Ten West schedule. That will help you. We've got them at 40 overall in coaching and development. They do a decent job here. What's really holding them back from better development numbers is that the offense has just been horrendous the past couple seasons. Number 44 overall in the 2-year recruiting ranking. Now, the offense last season, these are some pretty bad numbers. So they were okay-ish. I mean, if you're being very generous at drive efficiency, their explosive drives number was awful. They really struggled to find a way to put up big plays. They struggled with negative drives, way too many 3-and-outs, way too many turnovers. They couldn't throw the ball at all, and their effective rush number wasn't great. We're really selling it how we got here. Defensively, though, look at this beautiful radar chart. Holy moly. So they were good at drive efficiency, but you could find a way to put some drives up, and that's often how, if they did give up points, how they did, because they were excellent at giving up big plays, really good at explosive drives. That was a great number for them last season. Negative drives is also quite good. Finding ways to force 3-and-outs, force turnovers. They were good against the run, but they were just outstanding against the pass. I mean, just what a year for Iowa defending the pass. We've got them projected at 7.5 wins when you count in the FCS game. I think there's potential room for them to beat this projection at 29 overall, because I think we may be underestimating what not employing your dumb kid as offensive coordinator could potentially do for this Iowa team. So Iowa State, we have projected as pretty good coming into this season. They return a ton of production. They were sneaky good at the end of last season. Iowa State also just historically stumbles out of the gate in the dumbest possible ways and often outplays Iowa and manages to lose the game on turnovers and bumbles. So This, even with Iowa State projected to be pretty good, this game still projects to be pretty close. Iowa gets it at home. Like I said, I think they could beat this projection at 29. This might be closer to 3 points. That's definitely within the range that this could, whether at a turnover or Iowa State doing something dumb like they often do in the early season, this could go the other way. Troy is a game they should absolutely win. Minnesota did not look good at all in their game. Really, I mean, you could maybe make an argument they had a decent defensive game. North Carolina has been pretty good offensively under Mac Brown. Of course, with Drake May out, and we'll see what North Carolina turns into over the entirety of the season. Ohio State, this would be a really tough game for the Hawkeyes. They're going to have an excellent defensive game. They're going to have to get some turnovers. Jim Knowles is now that Brent Venables is a head coach, Jim Knowles is probably the best defensive coordinator going in college football right now. This defense should be loaded for Ohio State. This might not be, even with Tim Brewster and not Ferenc the Younger, might not be a very fun day at the office for the Hawkeye offense. This Washington game is a fascinating game for me. Just because I do like Jed Fish as a play caller. I think that Washington is going to find a way to move the ball. Sometimes Fish can struggle naming the right quarterback coming out of camp. They should have that figured out by the time this game rolls around, whether or not they needed to or not. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see him against Phil Parker. I think this could be a good matchup because I think Washington's defense is still going to be good enough here to potentially force some punts out of Iowa themselves. This could be a tight game, could go either way. They do get it at home. This Michigan State game, again, like I said, could be kind of interesting. As I've been talking about the Spartans, again, I'm not projecting them to suddenly be good this season. I think they have a ways to go on that. But I do think that they, Jonathan Smith, in my experience, tends to get the most out of whatever the players he has on the roster. He probably right at this moment has a better roster than he had when he was at Oregon State. Northwestern, not that it is entirely cohesive, of course, but I think with Aiden Childs, it could be an interesting year. This game could be closer to 3 points in Iowa's favor by the time we get to it. We've talked a bit about Northwestern, a team that could be fun. I think if they can get things going offensively, I think they still have a ways though. Wisconsin's in it, a really interesting team to me. They have struggled very much on both sides of the ball. I like the Tyler Van Dyke, add-on. This game, if Wisconsin beats this projection, could be close to, and again, I do expect Iowa to beat theirs, so maybe it's closer to 2 points in Iowa's favor here at home. I do expect that this UCLA game on the road is still Iowa favored, maybe by 4 points by the time we get there. I think UCLA is over projected a bit. And then you finish with two games that, one of which with Maryland that Iowa should be, I think even by the time we get to the end of the year should be a favorite in. This Nebraska team could be really interesting. This game could be the opposite of a barn burner. I mean, this game could be really close with not a lot of scoring. Maybe the best field goal kicker wins. I was going to need some better field goal kicking. All right. Terrapins. Mike Loxley's your head coach. We have them projected at 49 overall. They were at 27 and 23 and 36 and 22. So we do have them projected to take a little bit of a step back. The offense is at 25 last season. Josh Gaddish is your offensive coordinator. I like this. I like the Maryland offense. I mean, I think Loxley, people always point to Lane Kiffin, but things really, really started to perk up in a positive way with Loxley as OC and then really took off in a really big way under Sarkisian at Alabama. They're going to have a new quarterback. I mean, I should say for Iowa, it's going to be Caden McNamara, 51.1% completion percentage, 5.6 per. It's going to be Billy Edwards or MJ Morris for Maryland. But they just don't return a ton on the offensive side of the ball. The defense was okay, kind of a middle of the road power 4 defense last year. That might be something they could potentially hang their hat on. Special teams are pretty bad. That's something that they'd certainly like to improve coming into this year. They're not returning a ton on defense. It's a decent amount. Their coaching and development hasn't been phenomenal, something they'd certainly like to be able to pick up because their recruiting is okay. Loxley his reputation. I mean, he's a phenomenal recruiter. He did and really is known to recruit the DMV, area really well. It's certainly something they'd like to pick up. I think for them is to get more going on the recruiting trail. Offensively last season, they were decent at being able to sustain drives and find ways to put up points. They were a pretty explosive offense overall, though. That was where they made more of their hay. They struggled a bit, and if you watch Maryland, you will understand they struggled a bit with 3 and outs. They struggled a bit with turnovers. Negative drives number wasn't great. They didn't run the ball terribly well. They threw the ball pretty well last season, though. That's something, again, like something to keep an eye on with a new quarterback coming in, where this Maryland team sort of finishes out. Defensively, this is an okay unit. Like I said, kind of middle of the Power 4. They did a decent job avoiding giving up long drives, finding ways to get up the field. Again, like another decent job avoiding giving up big plays. They were pretty good at negative drives, finding ways to force 3 and outs, force turnovers. Not a big run pass split either way. They could definitely improve on either, I think, coming into this year. We've got them projected at almost 7 wins, 6.76 wins when you count in the FCS game. And it starts out, I think, pretty in their favor. This Connecticut game is a game they're certainly going to be favored to win. They've got the FCS game. Then you get a game against Michigan State. And again, like I said, I'm not expecting this, I just expect the Spartans to beat their projection a little bit. Maryland does have this game at home. This game could be pretty tight. This game might be down to 1 or 2 points in the spread by the time we get to it, depending on how Michigan State looks in their first 2 games. Then they get Virginia. This Virginia team has really struggled. I don't know that they're going to kind of take a really big step forward, but this Maryland team, like I said, with everything they're losing offensively, they could take a step back. Indiana, this is a game that they should win. Just avoid finishing -2 on turnovers, and you should win this one. Northwestern, again, this is a game that Maryland as a program, they should be better than a Northwestern team that I think is still rebuilding. Don't turn the ball over. You're at home. Should be able to walk away with a win. This USC game is really interesting. I think USC is under projected here at number 40 overall, but they've been awful defensively under Riley. They were pretty good. They were number 8 overall offensively last season, but Caleb Williams covered up for a multitude of problems on the offense. They don't return a ton on the offensive side of the ball. This USC team's kind of hard to project coming into this year. I'm totally willing to believe that they're going to beat this number 40 overall projection, though, and we'll get into that when we cover them. Minnesota, as we talked about, this game, Maryland might be favored by more. Minnesota absolutely struggled offensively. Maybe the defense is better than we think. We'll see where this North Carolina team shakes out and what that tells us, as we get more data in, what we should think about the Minnesota defense. This Oregon game's without a bunch of turnovers is just going to be out of reach. It's away. That's a long trip. This Rutgers game, I really do think this is a game Maryland should win. Avoid turning the ball over 2 or 3 times. I think you should be fine. This Iowa game's pretty tough. And, this Iowa defense, if there's one thing you would bet on, out of any of the units on the field that day, it's the Iowa defense. Maryland's going to have to make it happen. And I think they're going to struggle to do that in this game. And this Penn State game, again, this Penn State team should just be too talented. I think Maryland's going to have to kind of find their magic again, unless they really nail it with a quarterback coming into this year. Feels like maybe a little bit of a rebuilding year for them. And that's okay. Because I think there's a reasonable argument that they had, they've done pretty well, this coaching staff with what they have. All right. Michigan, a team no one has ever heard. Just kidding. Sharon Moore is your head coach now. We've got them projected at number 9 overall. They finished last year at number 3. I know some of you are going to be like, they finished at number 1, but okay. There are 2 teams that I would expect, if you talk to an odds maker, that if they had been in the playoff would have been favored over everybody. But that's not the way the game always goes. That's part of why we like football. Offensively, they were pretty good last year, number 9 overall. They've got a new OC in place, replacing Sharon Moore, who's now head coach. Kirk Campbell is your new offensive coordinator. That's a pretty good offense. They weren't great, but like I said, like pretty good. Maybe about 78% of it as effective as the number one offense, which was LSU last season. But of course, like way better than LSU's defense. Really good defense last year, number 2 overall on defense. They get a really good DC coming in, Wink Martindale. I think the defense is largely going to be pretty good and fine. I think there's like Michigan's going to have some bumps this year just because they're replacing so much production and because they largely developed a lot of it and didn't necessarily just recruit it in and then develop it. I mean, they really developed their butts off, I think, on that. But they're at number 5 overall on special teams last season. They did a really good job there. They just don't have a lot coming back. 130 overall on the offensive side of the football, 101 on the defensive side. That's really, it's going to be hard to be at anywhere near the level they were last season, I think, with given that. Their coaching and development number is only at 20 or 34 overall. There's still some of the dip in here, but they were at number 3 in 23 and number 5 in 22. Those are pretty good numbers overall. I think Michigan, as we come into next season, like we should expect their coaching and development number to continue to improve. Offensively last year, they were decent at drive efficiency. They found ways to sustain drives and put up points. And again, like decent, I mean, these are good numbers. Like for a top 10 offense, these are pretty good numbers. And their explosive drives number, finding ways to, put up big plays. They struggled a bit at negative drives. I mean, I guess ish. Well, let's be honest, not really. Like it's not that bad of a number. Honestly, their worst number, if you're looking at these, is probably their explosive drives number. They were better running the ball, unsurprisingly, than they were throwing the ball. This was a really good offense. Like I don't want to sound like I'm like poo-pooing like the number 9 offense overall in there. This is a really good offense last season. Defense, though, this is a phenomenal radar chart. They did an excellent job finding ways to get off the field, not give up long drives. They didn't give up big plays. They were really good at negative drives, forcing 3 and outs, forcing turnovers. Very good against the run, very good against the pass. Just so much to hang your hat on with this defense. Now, they do have a 12-game schedule, so we don't need to add one. I should say a 12-game FBS schedule. We don't need to add one here. So we've got them projected at 9 wins. Michigan's an interesting team here because of the expanded playoff. If they were able to get to 10 wins, you're talking about like a definite, playoff contender here. And a lot may hinge. I mean, they're going to get this Fresno State team early on. This is a game they should absolutely win. Should be a tune-up. Even if they turn the ball over 2 or 3 times, they should still win pretty comfortably. This Texas game is a tight one. We've got this projected basically as a toss-up. And I know a lot of Texas fans won't think that way. Now, Texas has done a really good job, I think, replacing what they lost at wide receiver. But I do have questions, of course, at running back, given the injuries that they've suffered in the offseason, as well as like whether Quinn Ewers can really put it together. But this game could be really interesting because I do think Michigan's defense should be really good. They have some outstanding players left, even after losing so much production. But Texas's defense has also been really good. It's been their bread and butter under Sarkisian so far. Kwiatkowski has really put the defense together. I think that this should be an interesting defensive matchup. It's going to give us a really good idea where both of these offenses are. Texas needs the offense to take a step forward if they want to actually compete for a national title this season. Arkansas State, this is a game they should absolutely win. Look, I've talked about it. I think USC is under projected coming into here. They are probably closer to 20. That probably still, however, puts them as like a 7-point underdog to Michigan at home. Maybe you're feeling generous and it's like 4, but Michigan should be a favorite here. Don't turn the ball over 2 or 3 times and you should walk away with a win. It's hard for me to believe that USC is going to make the jump on defense and really hold serve on offense, given everything going on. Then you get a Minnesota team. Look, Michigan should walk away with this one. This Washington game, in a rematch of the title game from last season, like I said, I like Fish as a play caller. I just don't think they have the horses. I think Washington is like like very much the same position with production losses that Michigan is, but without the kind of roster depth that Michigan likely has and continuity that Michigan likely has also on the staff to be able to sustain themselves through this. So Michigan should walk away with the win there. I feel pretty good. That's going to be about 7 points. Illinois and Michigan State. These are games Michigan should win. I think, like I said, like Jonathan Smith is quite clever. I don't think he's going to be able to clever the talent deficit there. This Oregon game is a really tough one. They're probably going to need some turnovers by the Ducks. They do get them at home, but the Ducks are probably going to have to turn it over 2, maybe 3 times in order to lose this game. This Oregon team should be really, really good this season. Then you get Indiana and Northwestern, 2 teams you should beat. And then it's the Buckeyes. This game should be really interesting. I mean, I think if like the Buckeyes would, had their way, they'd play. I mean, like you'd rather play this game really early in the season, catch Michigan while they're still breaking in. A bunch of guys maybe haven't found their rhythm. But this is going to be a tough game for this Michigan offense. I do think this Ohio State defense is really loaded up for bear. I expect that they're going to be able to likely contain this Michigan offense this year and set their offense up for some short field. All right, I'm on the hook. I got to talk about Jonathan Smith now. I've said all these good things. Look, we've only got them projected at 63 overall. Offensively, they were 109 last season. That is a horrible Power 4 offense. Brian Lindgren is your new offensive coordinator. He came with Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. They also bring one of the best offensive line coaches in the country with them. I unsurprisingly think that like they're going to take a step forward. Like they may not be like a top 25 offense, but from 109, if they get into the 30s, that would be outstanding. Defensively, pretty bad. Number 97 overall on defense last year as well. The only bright spot, it turns out, was special teams. Kind of bright side of the of the Power 4 middle. The bright side of the Power 4 average there at 29 overall. They're not returning a lot of production on the offensive side of the football. But like I said, they do get Aiden Childs to come over from Oregon State. Really, really prized recruit for that Oregon State program. And Jonathan Smith, 68.6% completion percentage, 8.8 per. He's really mobile. Another year spending time in an offseason with Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren should have him ready to go to throw the football. Really excited to see him in this offense. Last season, they were able to cobble things together with basically no wide receivers, some tight ends, and some running backs, and a good offensive line. They returned quite a bit on the defensive side of the ball. Joe Rossi's your new defensive coordinator. He came over from Minnesota. I think this is a good hire. I think they have an opportunity on defense to take a pretty good step forward too. Chance, like it's why we have them projected at 63, even though there's some horrible numbers at offense and defense. They haven't done great. I mean, they were at 97 and 23 and 57 and 22. So they have not been great at developing talent the last couple seasons under Mel Tucker. Their 2-year rolling recruiting average is at 31. They're going to need to pick that up. I mean, like that is better than where Oregon State recruits. Like Smith would we'll see where he shakes out with a full season of recruiting under, time to actually recruit and not being dropped in after the first national signing day and trying to scramble to get things together. Their drive efficiency numbers last season were just awful. This is something Smith and company should be able to clean up, in particular, being able to sustain drives and put up points. Jim Halchek's the offensive line coach. He should be able to, he can coach him up for sure. Explosive drives number, they're going to have to be able to create more big plays. They're going to have to avoid three and outs and turnovers. That negative drives number is awful. This is just an awful Power 4 offense. And their effective pass, they struggled with, but they're even worse running the ball somehow. Again, like I expect they're going to be able to run the ball a little bit here. It's been a bit of a trademark that Smith can scheme up a running game with Mahalchuk coaching up the O-line. On the defensive side of the ball, a little more to hang your hat on the drive efficiency. They did find a way to use the field to their advantage and avoid giving up long drives. They struggled with explosive drives, giving up way too many big plays last season. That's something they have to clean up. Negative drives, this is an okay number given how bad their explosive drives number is. sure, take a victory lap on that one. They were a little bit better on the run than they were defending the pass. That's something they're going to have to clean up too. Counting in the FCS game, we've got them projected at 5.35 wins. So if they beat this projection, you could be talking about a backdoor, kind of sneaky bowl team. Florida Atlantic, a game that I believe is on like right now. This is a game they should definitely win. If we've got it projected at, like about 12.5 coming in, with where we have Michigan State projected coming into the season. I'm not expecting them to come in with the full Smith playbook, like all the way down and understood. But this is a game that like they may have to turn over the ball over 2 or 3 times. Then you get to like 2 games in a row where one, they're the underdog and they're probably going to need to beat the projection to beat this Maryland team that's just in a better spot of late than they have been at. They should beat this Boston College team. Boston College brings in, of course, Bill O'Brien, kind of an exciting, kind of a wild and exciting quarterback. Boston College has. Michigan State, if they can just avoid the turnovers, they should be fine in this game. Even though it's on the road, they get 2 really, really tough games back to back. And look, I mean, Jonathan Smith is I remember the first time when I saw Oregon State, his first game, and they went into the Horseshoe and played at Ohio State, and they got beat pretty bad, but they also burned the Ohio State defense a couple times on some schemed up stuff. They're going to get beat pretty bad again in this game. Like Knowles is a terrific, just a terrific head coach or defensive coordinator. They're going to have their work cut out for them. Then they go, then they have to go play at Oregon, another place that Jonathan Smith is extremely familiar with. This is a really tough game for them. They're going to need a couple turnovers to hang in either of those. This Iowa game, look, I think Iowa's under projected here at 29. I think even with, Michigan State being under projected, like this is probably close to 5. They're going to need a turnover or 2, I think, to hang in this one. I think it's going to be tough for them given where they've been to make that such a big jump that they're suddenly like a top 40, top 20, top 30 team. This Indiana game is one they should win, though. I think this is probably closer to 5 or 6 by the time the game rolls around. Illinois, I actually think by the time this game rolls around, Michigan State may be favored by 3. And then you need to beat Purdue and Rutgers, right? And I think that they can do both, but maybe this Purdue game is close to a toss-up by the time we get to it. I don't think that Michigan State, like I said, I don't think this is the season that they're going to come out and win like 8 games or something like that and just surprise everyone. I think it's going to be a bit of a build, but I do think that they are going to have their moments this season, and that should be something to keep an eye on. And if you're a Michigan State fan, you should be excited. Like I really, really like this coaching staff, and yeah, you should too. All right, the Gophers have already played their own one, which tells us something. Not a lot, but something. We have them projected at 62 overall. This offense in particular, I think, is like we've got we've got PJ Fleck as your head coach. Greg Harbaugh is your offensive coordinator. Corey Heatherman is your defensive coordinator. Max Brosman's your likely quarterback. They struggled on offense last season, 78 overall in beta rank. They were really bad also on defense. You might be surprised that I like the Rossi hire. He's been mostly good at Minnesota in his time there. I wouldn't say he was great, but he's been mostly good. They really just took a major step back last season. Special teams were also pretty bad last year. They're not returning a ton on the offensive side of the ball, but they do bring it back a lot on defense. I think that's part of the reason we have them projected to improve. We had them at 88 last season. They were at 25 overall in 22, largely because the defense took a big step forward. They're at 83 overall in coaching and development. They've kind of been all over the place, but they've often underperformed where their recruiting rankings have been. I mean, again, like some of the teams in the Big Ten have sometimes piled up some Big Ten West have sometimes piled up some wins by playing in the Big Ten West. Now, offensively last year, they struggled to drive efficiency. They struggled to find ways to put together long drives and put up points. Defensively, as A lot of the same story on explosive drives. Too many big plays. They need to find ways to cut that or to put up more of those too. Negative drives, too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. They were just a mountain better running the football than they were defending the pass. I know, like at points in the Fleck era, they've really tried to hang their hat on their offensive line. I just, even though that run number is better, it's not so good. And when you can't throw the ball at all, it's a major problem. Defensively, they struggled to find the ways to avoid giving up long drives last year. They gave up too many big plays. The one thing that kind of worked for them was their negative drives number. They found a way to force some 3-and-outs and force some turnovers of all things. But they were not great against the run. They were marginally better against the pass. Anyway, we've got them projected when you count in the FCS game at about 5 wins, 3.93, 4.93 with the FCS game. They already dropped the game against North Carolina. It was a really tight game. The game against Nevada, we have this one projected. They should be a significant favorite. This should be a little bit of a get right game for them. Nevada looked pretty good against SMU in a small sample size. So keep an eye here. I don't want to overcommit to what we saw out of Nevada in one game. I think this is a team that's still in a rebuild. Then we get an Iowa team here. Like I said, Iowa's going to be better than their likely to be better than their projection because the offense with a new OC is going to take a big step forward. I like Iowa to be favored by this number of 7, maybe a little more for this game, even though it's on the road. This Michigan game is going to be really tough. Yes, Michigan's rebuilding. Michigan's going to need to turn it over a couple times here. USC, I do expect to beat this projection. Maybe they're in the 20s. At that point, you're probably talking about this being like 10 points here. UCLA, I do feel like this game's probably a little tighter, but I still would expect UCLA to be favored. Maybe it's like 3 points here. Because I think UCLA is going to underperform this projection at 32. This Maryland game, you can argue it's probably pretty tight. I do like Maryland to be a favorite here. And maybe it is about these 3.5 points. Illinois, I think this is fair to still project this as a toss up. I know Illinois rolled against an FCS opponent, but it's against an FCS opponent. I need to see more out of the Illini before we, kind of make that call. Rutgers, this is an interesting one. I mean, I do think that Minnesota has a shot to win this game. We've got them projected as a slight favorite. I know a lot of people are higher on Rutgers than we are coming into the season. Keep an eye on that. Penn State, this is a game they're going to have a lot of turnovers and a lot of help. And Wisconsin, look, this is a rivalry game. We've got Wisconsin projected to be a bit better. And I think that's probably fair. 7 points feels about right for, Wisconsin being at home. All right, Nebraska. Matt Rule is your head coach. We got him projected at 51, which is not a great Power 4 team coming into the season. Offensively, they were awful coming into last season. Marcus Satterfield is your offensive coordinator. He was your offensive coordinator last year. I'm extremely skeptical of the claims that Marcus Satterfield is going to get an excellent quarterback and all of a sudden things are just going to be better. Because I've seen this movie before when he was at South Carolina and Spencer Rattler came in. I think they'll be better than this 104 number. I'd be shocked if they live up to where Raiola and his family want to be. He's been named the starter. Tony White, though, is your defensive coordinator, and he and Matt Rule, this does look like a pretty vintage. I mean, now, vintage Matt Rule teams weren't this bad on offense, but they weren't usually very good on offense. This feels like a bit of a vintage Matt Rule team. Defensively, they were quite good. I think they have a chance to be really good coming, into this season too. Number 17 overall last year. Special teams could certainly perk up. They could definitely use to make a few more field goals. They're returning an okay amount on offense, returning quite a bit on the defensive side of the ball. That's part of why I think I'm pretty high on where this defense could be coming into this season, as well as another season of coaching by White and Rule. The coaching and development, they've really struggled. We had them at 54 and 23 and 66 and 22. Nebraska is not out there recruiting like gangbusters at 32 overall in recruiting. They certainly need to be better, though, in both recruiting and development, I think, if they want to get to where they want to go. I think they're well on their way defensively. TBD on the offensive side of the football where this shakes out. Their drive efficiency number, they really struggled last year. They could not sustain drives to put up points. They could not put up big plays. Their play efficiency was okay comparatively, but it's the least important number. They struggled to avoid 3 and outs, struggled to avoid turnovers. They were a lot better, unsurprisingly, running the football than they were throwing the football. This number might flip. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the ceiling for this Nebraska offense is higher than in the 40s. That's a massive improvement, though. And if they do that, manage that, I think you're talking about a team that overall beats this projection, maybe even gets up into the 20s, which would be beating this projection by a good bit. Defensively, this is a much nicer radar chart. They did a good job at drive efficiency, finding ways to avoid giving up long drives, but they did give up some big plays. That's something they'd like to clean up coming into this year. Really good job on negative drives, avoiding 3 and outs, avoiding turnovers, forcing them. This is defense. Forcing 3 and outs, forcing turnovers. Pretty good against the run and the pass. Nothing major stands out there. With the FCS game, we've got them projected at about 6.5 wins. I like them to beat this projection because I do think the offense is going to be considerably better without being really, really good. UTEP, this is a game they should absolutely walk away with a win. They're a significant favorite. Don't turn the ball over 3 or 4 times. This Colorado game is really interesting. They should be a really good test for this Colorado offense. That of course should be really good. I think the more interesting question, because I don't think Colorado's defense is likely going to be there, is where is this Nebraska offense in this game? Last year, of course, they pretty much gave away the game on turnovers. We have Colorado projected as an ever so slight favorite here on the road. I think by the time this game rolls around, we might have Nebraska favored by 1 or 2. We'll see. I'm excited for this game in particular. Then we get Illinois. This is a game that, again, like Nebraska beats their projection. They're probably something like a 5, 6, maybe a 7-point favorite as we come into this game. Purdue, this is probably close to a toss-up. I think that feels pretty fair for these two teams. Rutgers, this could be close to 10 points. And again, I think that feels pretty fair for this Rutgers team. We're not as high on them as others are coming into this year. Indiana might be around 10 points as well. I mean, if Nebraska beats this projection, if they perk things up on the offensive side of the football a bit, it is a pretty favorable schedule. Because you only really have, of the juggernauts, you only get Ohio State here. So if you're going to talk yourself into Nebraska, it's part improvement and part schedule. Because the only game that's completely out of reach is this Ohio State game. Here, Ohio States are going to have a really bad day at the office offensively with a couple turnovers. UCLA is an interesting one. I think UCLA is probably over projected. This is probably closer to a toss-up, maybe Nebraska favored by 2 or 3. This USC game is really interesting. We've got USC as a slight favorite. I think both these teams beat their projections. It is on the road. It feels fair to probably put this around 4 or 5 points. Wisconsin's, it could be a tough game or a tight game. They do get them at home. I do think Nebraska beats the projection. This is, I'd actually put this as pretty close to a toss-up, maybe Nebraska by 1 or 2. And then this Iowa game, this could be, I think we talked about this a little bit with Iowa. Maybe not a lot of points scored in this game. Both of these defenses should be really good. Both of these offenses have question marks, although I think we are projecting them both to improve. I might put this close to a toss-up, maybe Iowa favor, just because I think they've got a little more continuity on both sides of the ball. All right. And that, man, we're like on the cusp of halfway through. Northwestern on the cusp and need to switch sheets. David Bowron is your head coach. We've got them projected at 65 overall. Zach Lujan is your offensive coordinator, came over from South Dakota State. Defensively or offensively last season, they were pretty bad Power 4 offense, number 66 overall. They were a bit better on the defensive side of the ball at number 43. David Braun is also your defensive play caller here. Mike Wright's your likely QB starter. We've got them at 49 on special teams. That's another number that they'd like to improve coming into this season. They don't return a ton on the offensive side of the ball. It's a reason we don't have them projected to improve a lot coming into this year. In fact, we've got them projected to take a little step back off of being at 55 and 23. But they were significantly improved. They were at 90, just 2 years ago. So, I mean, there is some potential that I think that they've got it a little more put together second year under Braun. Defensively, they don't return a ton, but they do return a decent amount. There's a shot that I think the defense under Braun, maybe takes a little bit of a step forward. I think with Lujan, if he could really get it going, that's what might, if you're going to talk yourself into them beating their projection there, that's where it comes from. Their recruiting's not great, 63 overall in your 2-year rolling recruiting ranking, and the coaching development also has not been great of late. Hitting 90 overall, that's going to hurt. Offensively, they were a little low. I mean, they were decent-ish comparatively at putting up long drives to put up points because they certainly weren't putting them up with big plays. Way too many 3-and-outs, way too many turnovers. That negative drives number really, really hurts. They weren't great running the ball. They weren't great throwing the ball. The defensive numbers were a bit better. They were pretty good overall at drive efficiency, finding ways to, avoid giving up long drives. Their explosive drives number is pretty good. That's a decent play efficiency number. Again, the least important of the core 4 metrics. And the same goes for their negative drives. They were a lot better defending the pass than they were against the run. That's something to keep an eye on. We've got them projected with the FCS game at about 4.23 wins. This Miami of Ohio game is an interesting one. I like this Miami defense. And they've been pretty consistent. This could be a tight game if they don't beat this projection. I think Miami of Ohio could be pretty good this season. Just something to keep an eye on here. Kind of an interesting game early on to kind of gauge where Northwestern is coming into this season. If they were able to blow the doors off Miami of Ohio, that'd be kind of a good sign for Northwestern coming in. This Duke team's an interesting one. We've got them projected to take a little bit of a step back with Manny Diaz taking over. Northwestern we have as an underdog though here. I think that given the coaching turnover, which the modeling doesn't see, I think you have a chance that Northwestern probably has this as a toss up coming into here. I feel like that's pretty fair. This Washington game, I don't want to say it's just a mystery, but I'm not sure where the depth is going to be. Washington should absolutely be favored. I'm not saying that. It might be closer to 7 points by the time we get to this game. Then we get to some interesting games, I think, for this Indiana squad. If they were to pick up a win with Duke, then you get to an Indiana team that you should be favored against. Don't turn the ball over. You should be okay here. Maryland, I think, is a team that, because it's a little bit of a rebuild, that they might put this game somewhere close to being in reach here. This might be a game on the road where maybe you just only have to finish +1 on turnovers, get a little bit of luck, and it might go your way. Wisconsin hasn't played so well of late that this game projects to be a blowout here. It's at home. They're only about a 7-point underdog here. Wisconsin might beat their projection. So even if Northwestern did as well, 7 points feels pretty fair for this one. Iowa's a tough game. The Iowa defense is something you can absolutely count on here. They might need to finish +2 or 3 on turnovers. Purdue here. This is an interesting one. A game you can talk yourself into being in reach. Ohio State's a tough one. Michigan's a really tough one. But you finish with an Illinois team that I think feels in reasonably in range. We've got this projected as really close to a toss-up. It's at home. If the offense takes a step forward under Lujan, then I think it's. Yeah, you could talk yourself into this being a pretty tight game here. If you squint through this, maybe, you win a game, and this is, that Illinois game maybe gets you into bowl eligibility. All right, now we're starting to get into the all-in teams this season anyway. Ohio State, we've got him projected at number 2 overall. Ryan Day is your head coach. Chip Kelly is your new offensive coordinator. Jim Knowles, of course, we've mentioned him a few times, is your DC. They were at number 11 offensively last season. They did take a step back, particularly in throwing the football. I think one of the more interesting stories, though, coming into this season is that if you look at where they were versus 2019, when Ryan Day had his best year as offensive coordinator and head coach, they've really, really struggled to run the football. Their offensive line struggles have been something to see. They had the number 1 defense last season. They were just phenomenal. They returned a good bit. They picked up a ton in the portal. The defense should be outstanding this season. Special teams are really good. Definitely something they could improve on a little bit, make a few more field goals at number 15 overall. It wouldn't hurt to be in the top 5 on that, on special teams too. They returned an okay amount on the offensive side. Will Howard is your quarterback here, 61.3% completion percentage, 7.4 per. I mean, in a different year, or in a year with a different set of quarterbacks in the portal, Howard might not feel like such a win to get. And at one point he was projected to go to USC, which I sort of found odd given the way Lincoln Riley likes to play. He's a pretty good fit for Chip Kelly, who doesn't often ask his quarterbacks to do a lot that isn't set up by the run game. Kelly has a more sophisticated run package than Ryan Day does, and has had. So even I do think that Ryan Day has had his struggles. I expect Kelly's run scheme is going to help clean up some of those issues running the football. They're at number 5 overall in coaching and development, and they're at number 1 in their 2-year rolling recruiting ranking. I mean, relative to recruiting, they still develop the heck out of kids at Ohio State. Offensively last year, they struggled with it a little bit with drive efficiency, being able to sustain long drives to put up points. I'm interested to see this one. I'm also interested to see their explosive drives number, just because Howard is not an amazing downfield passer with his accuracy. Now, under Day, they've gotten a little bit away from the running game and have relied more on passing. I'm interested to see what this looks like with Chip Kelly calling the plays, more sophisticated run scheme. And if they are able to rely more on passes into the tight ends, even though they have an outstanding group of wide receivers. Their negative drives number was pretty good. They avoided 3 and outs and avoided turnovers. They were pretty good throwing the ball. They needed to be a lot better given how much they have struggled running the football. Defensively, this is just an outstanding radar chart. They were excellent at drive efficiency, finding ways to avoid giving up long drives and avoid giving up points. They did a great job containing big plays. They could improve a bit. I mean, if you're being really nitpicky at negative drives down there, they were excellent against the pass. They could improve against the run. That hurt them a bit against Michigan. We've got them, and this is a 12-game FBS schedule, so we've got them projected just short of 11 wins. When a team projects that, you can easily see that team going undefeated. Although there's 2 really good games on the schedule. The non-conference schedule feels like it should barely count as playing 12 FBS teams when you start out with Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. That is just a whole bunch of tune-ups that are going to be on national television for some reason. Just awful. I mean, Ohio State should win absolutely handily. You just don't want to come out of any of these games with injuries in the tune-up period while your starters are in. Then they get Michigan State. Like this game again, like Michigan State is going to have a hard time in this game. It is on the road, but this is a tough game for the Spartans. I expect Ohio State's going to win by at least 21 points. This Iowa game, though, I think is really interesting because the Iowa defense is so good. Now, the Iowa offense is going to struggle in this game. So the Ohio State offense is going to have largely some good field position, but it's going to be a test that's going to tell us a lot about where this offense is with Chip Kelly. And then the next week they get Oregon. And this should be really fun. Probably the most exciting matchup of the season is Will Stein and this Oregon offense against Jim Knowles and this Ohio State defense. Really, really looking forward to this one. We have this as a toss-up. I think you can talk yourself into Oregon being a slight favorite at home. Nebraska, this is another game, I think, where you get another really good defense. Nebraska's offense simply isn't going to be in the frame of the conversation to, I think, make this a really good game unless they get a bunch of turnovers out of the Buckeyes. Penn State, this is a really interesting one. New offensive coordinator in place for them. I think you can make an argument that they're going to be pretty improved offensively off of where they have been. I'm interested to see where Tom Allen has them defensively. This is still a game the Buckeyes should likely win. But it could be tight. They need to avoid turnovers. Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana. Don't turn the ball over 5 or 6 times. You'll be fine. And then you get the last game against Michigan. We talked about this a little bit. I expect Ohio State is going to be fine in this game. I think that they're going to be able to put together some drives against this Michigan defense. I think clearly you'd rather get Michigan early because they have so many new faces. But this Michigan offense, I think, is going to struggle a bit against this Ohio State defense. Don't turn the ball over a couple times and you should be okay here at home. Don't turn the ball over a couple times because Ryan Day is going to have a tough time in Columbus if they do. All right, on to the Ducks. All right. Oregon, we've got them projected at number 3, right behind the Buckeyes. Dan Lanning is your head coach. Will Stein's your offensive coordinator. Tosh Lupoi is your DC. Look, the Ducks are a little bit of kind of like a funhouse mirror image of the Buckeyes. Really, really good offense. Defense needs to take a little bit of a step forward. They were number 2 offensively last season, right behind LSU. This was an excellent offense last year. Dylan Gabriel's your likely starter. 69.3% completion percentage, 9.5 per for Oklahoma last season. Defensively, I don't want to undersell this because this is progress for them on defense, getting up to number 13. But I think for Oregon to kind of meet the goals that they want, they're going to need this defense to take even more of a step forward. The special teams were pretty good last season. It wouldn't hurt for them to get in the top 5 here either. They're not returning a ton on the offensive side of the ball, but a good amount. Same goes on defense. They have replaced through the portal and recruited really well as well. Returning defensive, they're going to need this needs to be the year they pop into the top 10 on defense. The coaching and development's pretty good. They have been so we had them at number 1 last season overall. Washington was just a tough matchup for them. And truly, none of the teams that were at the top last season were as good as teams that we had seen in 2019 or 2021 or 22. A little bit of a step back at the top last year for college football overall. The 2-year rolling recruiting ranking is number 12 overall, though they have been recruiting like gangbusters of late. Offensively last year, they were excellent at drive efficiency. They found ways to put together long drives to put up points. I think they were number 1 in the country at this last year. Explosive drives, they were very, very good at finding ways to put up big plays. LSU was number 1 overall at explosive drives, and there's a bit of a gap. That's how good LSU was at putting up big plays last season. They were really good at negative drives too, avoiding 3 and outs and avoiding turnovers. They have a pretty big run pass split. They definitely threw the ball really, really well last year, as opposed to running it. I don't expect that to change a ton coming into this year. I think Gabriel's going to be a really good plug and play fit. Defensively last year, excellent at drive efficiency. It was tough to find ways to put up long drives against them, but man, they gave up some big plays. That's what really hurt them. They were okay with their negative drives. That's another number they could clean up. They were definitely better against the run than they were against the pass. Again, maybe Washington wasn't a great matchup for them last season. Something to maybe keep an eye on here with what we talked about with Ohio State maybe being a bit more of a run-heavy team with Chip Kelly as your play caller. With the FCS game added in, we've got them projected at just under 11 wins, 10.89. They start out with Boise State, ostensibly a pretty tough game, but I think this is a game that they're going to be able to handle, avoid turnovers. They should be fine. Same goes for Oregon State. I think we might have Oregon State a little over projected coming into this season. I think they're going to take a step back from where we've got them projected at 36. Ducks are going to be favored by a big chunk no matter what. UCLA also is likely over projected. So again, this game might be 28 by the time we get to it. I know that feels like a lot. I'm interested to see where UCLA is, given all of the changes that team has had. Michigan State, we talked about, like, I think Jonathan Smith is going to have them better than this projection, but this is still a significant gap here. Ohio State, this should be a really interesting one. I like, this is a toss-up. I like Oregon as a very, very slight favorite at home, but honestly, like, I can't wait to see this game. I am 100% not alone on this one. Schedule lightens up yet again. Then they get Purdue, Illinois. Don't turn the ball over a bunch of times. You should be good. Now they go on the road to the Big House to Michigan. They are about a 7-point favorite. I got to say that feels pretty fair. Here, like, I expect this Oregon team to be pretty good. This Michigan team, they're going to need to probably force a couple turnovers, and Oregon to have a bad day to walk away with the win. Then the schedule lightens up again. You get a Wisconsin team that maybe with Tyler Van Dyke can beat this projection at number 39 overall. And a Washington team that, I do expect to have things a bit more figured out by the time that this game rolls around. But I think Oregon should still be a significant favorite coming into this game. Close to 10 points, I think feels pretty fair. Washington's just got a lot of holes. They might have more things, a lot more figured out here. Depth-wise, this could be a tough point for them in the season. Did I cover it all? Yeah. All right, Penn State. I'm not alone. A lot of people are kind of like excited for Penn State coming into this year. Most of it's around the new offensive coordinator. James Franklin is your head coach, of course. We've got them projected at number 7 overall. They were number 6 in 23, number 9 in 22. They've been really consistent. I think there's been a lot of talk, like, if there's a team that's going to be helped out by the playoff, it's the playoff expansion. It's Penn State. That's not entirely wrong. They've been really good and largely just been in Ohio State, Michigan's shadow. Offensively, last season, they really struggled. Number 18 overall. Drew Alar is back, 59.9% completion percentage, 6.8 per. Both those numbers have to really improve. You're aiming for around 65% completion percentage in a modern college offense. You'd like to be closer to 8 and an 8.5 per when you're as talented as Penn State is. Andy Kotelnicki is your new offensive coordinator, comes over from Kansas, one of the most interesting and innovative offenses in college football. They even did it with their backup, Jason Bean, a lot last season and over the last 2 years. I'm pumped to see what this offense looks like. Like I said, I'm not alone at all in wanting to, anticipating that. Defensively, they were really good. I was not 100% sold that Manny Diaz was going to step in and they weren't going to skip a beat, and I was wrong. He absolutely stepped in and they didn't skip a beat. Tom Allen is your new defensive coordinator, though, because Manny Diaz is off to Coach Duke. They don't return a ton on offense or defense, but these aren't bad numbers. They are returning a decent bit of production on both. Their coaching and development number is okay. They're at number 22 overall. That's certainly something they can improve. Just getting a little bit better overall, being able to beat their recruiting and returning production numbers by a little bit more, I think would certainly help this coaching and development number. Offensively, buddy. They were okay at drive efficiency last season. They struggled more with putting up big plays. They really could not get the ball down the field throwing the football. Their negative drives, too many 3 and outs, too many turnovers. They were better running the ball than they were throwing the ball. It's got to be the year for Alar to really pick it up and get it together. Defensively, this is a much nicer radar chart, of course. Their drive efficiency number, they did a pretty good job finding ways to avoid giving up long drives. A great job at avoiding giving up explosive drives here. Their negative drives, just excellent at forcing 3 and outs, forcing turnovers. They were really on it. They were just outstanding against the run versus the pass. I'm interested to see how this holds up and shakes out coming into the season. Again, like, Tom Allen hasn't been a DC in a while. I'm just interested. I said I wasn't sold on the Manny D. Prove me wrong again. I'll gladly be wrong. Now we've got them on a 12-game FBS schedule. We've got them at 10.3 wins. And honestly, the schedule's pretty favorable, I think, in my mind. This West Virginia team definitely improved off of last year. I think they were a lot better offensively than I was expecting. I'm interested to see how they match up against this Penn State defense. Threw a lot of short stuff last year for West Virginia. Are they able to get away with it here in this game? I'd be somewhat surprised. But this is a game where they should it shouldn't be too much of a test. They should be able to kind of like break in the new offense here. Then you get Bowling Green and Kent State. Those are absolute massive tune-up games. Go ahead and try to hit these spread numbers here. Illinois has taken a massive step back defensively. Like, I think maybe they could improve a bit off of where they last year, but if you remember from earlier in this preview, they were pretty bad. This is another game that like it shouldn't be too much for them. Then they get the two LA teams right in a row. They get UCLA at home. I think they should be a pretty good favorite here. USC, this game should be tighter than we have it projected. Like I've talked about, like I think USC is a bit under projected. I think the new defensive coordinator is going to help out a lot with some of their numbers. Maybe this is closer to Penn State by 10. Maybe it's closer to Penn State by 7 by the time that this game rolls around. It is on the road. Penn State should just be the more complete team here. USC just feels like and we're going to find out, on Sunday with LSU, but they just feel like they have a lot of question marks still coming into this year. Then the schedule, you get Wisconsin. I think that they should be a significant favorite in this game. I think even if Wisconsin does take a step forward, but in some of these games, like they need to avoid having a really bad turnover game here or something like that here or there, and they should be fine. This Ohio State game is really interesting. If they are able to take a big step forward offensively, watch out. I mean, I'm not saying that they are necessarily like neck and neck with Ohio State or Oregon at the top of the Big Ten, but they're not far off. Definitely a game to keep an eye on here. I think it's going to be the first real measuring stick where we have, and maybe the only measuring stick on the schedule, frankly, we're going to have for them. Because after that, it lightens up again. They should be a significant favorite against Washington, like we've talked about with Washington's issues potentially. And then the schedule again, like don't turn the ball over a bunch of times. Like this feels like like if Penn State can get this through the schedule without completely shooting themselves in the foot, they had better make the playoff. If you don't make the playoff with this schedule, I mean, you got some explaining to do for sure. All right, Purdue. All right, we're cruising. We're in the home stretch. Maybe not quite the home stretch, but closing in. Ryan Walters is your head coach here, one of the best young coaches in all of college football. That's certainly true as a defensive coordinator. We'll see if that holds up as a head coach. They were at 79-23. They were at 49-22. We've got them only projected at 42. I think that like there's a reasonable shot that they can improve on these numbers, and that's why we have them projected to improve here off of where they were last year, given that we had them at 79. Offensively last season at 62, Graham Harrell is your offensive coordinator. And it's likely Hudson Card's your quarterback, former Texas QB. Got a cup of coffee at Nebraska. I mean, he flashed why he got recruited to Texas when he was at Texas, when he was on the field. But this offense last season struggled. This is a pretty bad Power 4 offense. I think they have enough talent that they should likely beat this number. Harrell's not an outstanding play caller, but he's a really good play caller. I thought it was a good get for Walters. Now, Walters was one of the best defensive coordinators in the country when he was at Illinois. It's how he ended up with this job. Defensively, though, they really struggled last season, 79 overall. They're going to need to improve these numbers. And for Walters, it's not unusual to see a coach come in and struggle with their same side of the ball when they take a head coaching gig, but it's kind of the one where you think like, oh, they should have that nailed down. And they're definitely going to have to improve this year. The special teams were just awful last year. 123 overall in special teams. They're going to need to perk those numbers up a bit. You can't be missing as many field goals as they did. Not a ton on the offensive side of the ball coming back, and certainly even less on the defensive side. The recruiting ranking isn't bad though. Number 46 overall. That's something that gives you some hope coming into this year. I think this is a pretty competent coaching staff overall. Offensively, they absolutely struggled to put together drives to put up points last season. They were a little bit better at finding big plays and explosive drives. Their negative drives number isn't great. They're going to have to improve there as well. They were a lot better running the ball than they were throwing the ball. Again, just keep an eye on Card and Harrell. Like, if everything's clicking for them, they're going to be able to throw the football. Defensively, their best number was negative drives, but their drive efficiency number, relatively speaking, wasn't bad. They definitely gave up some big plays, and they're going to have to clean that up coming into this season. Like I said, their negative drives number is pretty good comparatively. They did find a way to force some 3-and-outs, force some turnovers. They were a lot better against the run than they were against the pass. They're going to have to clean up their pass defense coming into this season. Walters, he's a good enough defensive coach. He should be able to get this side of the ball at least somewhat fixed. Although we just talked about like Ohio State, like Ryan Day needs to get the offense going and Dan Lanning needs to fix the defense at Oregon. So it's not, I mean, not that they're bad, but for what those teams' expectations are, you're not alone, Ryan Walters, in needing to fix the side of the ball you used to be a coordinator on. We've got them projected at 5.5 wins with you counting the FCS game, on the cusp of bowl eligibility, but this is a tough schedule for Purdue. Look, this Notre Dame game, the Irish should be really good this year. I like the Mike Denbrock hire. I like him paired up with Riley Leonard. We've got Notre Dame as a pretty significant favorite here. We're going to get a really good idea of who Notre Dame is early on when they play A&M. You can maybe talk yourself into if Purdue beating this projection. This is somewhat closer to like 12 points, but Notre Dame should be close to a double-digit favorite in this game. Like I said, this Oregon State team is probably a bit over-projected. I actually probably have Purdue close to a slight favorite here. Make it, 3 or 4 points. Nebraska, this is an interesting one. We have Purdue projected as a favorite. We do expect Nebraska to be better on offense and maybe beat this projection by a decent amount versus where we have them at 50 overall. I'd probably flip this and have Nebraska at home as a slight favorite here, but not so much that Purdue's out of this game. I think this could be a really interesting game for both teams, kind of tell us a lot. We've talked about Wisconsin has a chance to beat their projection. We've got this as pretty much a toss-up. That feels about fair for two teams that I do think have some questions coming into this year, which were about the same kind of bad last year, and you'll see that when we get to the Badgers. Illinois, I actually like Purdue to be favored in this game. I'm not too sanguine on Illinois. Willing to be proven wrong. Northwestern, look, Purdue should be a favorite here. I think even if Northwestern gets things going, maybe it's down to 3 points by the time it rolls around. Then the schedule gets hard. I mean, hard again. You also, sorry, I missed you have a game against Oregon. Good luck. Even though that's at home. Ohio State, they get this on the road. You're going to need probably 5 turnovers to be able to hang in this game. Penn State's probably 3 or 4. And then you finish with some games that are definitely winnable and you might need to win in order to hit bowl eligibility. You got Michigan State here. We've talked about that. I think Jonathan Smith can beat where they are in the projection. We'll see. I think this probably feels about fair. Maybe it's close to like 2 or 3 points by the time it rolls around where Purdue's favored. And then Indiana, like I'm not sanguine on their chances this year. I think it's going to be a tough year. I think Purdue has a shot to win this one. They should be favored by about 7 points. So you think you're like, oh, I'm almost to the end. And then you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. I still got to do like Rutgers and all right. I've been to a game at Rutgers when I was living in New York. I went and saw a game at Rutgers. Anyway, Greg Schiano is your head coach. Kurt Shiraka is your offensive coordinator. Joe Harasmiak is your DC. May have gotten that right. Ethan Kaliakmanis. Oh my God. Kaliak Manis. What is it? Like you started the OC all the way through the QB on that, and that is an absolute tongue twister. And I'm sure I got some of those wrong, and you are, except Shiraka, you're welcome to criticize me for it. Anyway, he was 53% completion percentage, 6.3 per last season at Minnesota. Look, we don't have them projected to be really good. They were at 64 in 23. They were at number 91 in 22. Offensively, they really struggled last season. Number 69 overall. That's nice, but it's not good. They were better defensively at number 52. I think people maybe think that the defense was a lot better than they were last season at times, but they also do return a lot. So I think maybe that's what you could hang your hat on for them to beat this projection. for them. They don't return a ton on the offensive side of the football. The coaching and development has not been good at all, relatively speaking, and the recruiting has not been good either at number 57. Look, this offense, they struggled to put together long drives to put up points last season. Their explosive drive, I mean, Rutgers got a little lucky at times too last year. Their explosive drives number wasn't great. They struggled to find ways to put up big plays. Their negative drives, too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. They really struggled to throw the football. They were better running the ball. Don't expect that to change with this transfer QB coming in. He wasn't great at Minnesota. Hence why he got beat out. Defensively, this is a bit better. Their drive efficiency wasn't terrible. They found ways to avoid giving up long drives. Could definitely improve their explosive drives number. They need to give up fewer big plays. Their negative drives wasn't bad, forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers. They were a bit better against the run than they were against the pass, not by much. Actually, if you look at those, you kind of flip it. They were a bit better against the pass than they were against the run. Ignore me. You look at the schedule, we've got them projected with the FCS game at about 4.26 wins. And the schedule's not brutal. And this is another reason I think people are talking themselves into Rutgers here. Start out with Akron. Definitely a winnable game. Virginia Tech's a tough one. Like, they return a ton of production. They were improving down the back half of last year. They played pretty well down the back stretch. Definitely a team that we have pegged as kind of on the rise coming into this season. We've got Virginia Tech by 21 points here. That does feel like a lot. Virginia Tech, I mean, this is probably the top end of their projection here at number 15. But I do expect them to win this game by about 14 points when all said and done. This Washington game is a really tough one. I don't know that Washington's going to have it like totally figured out by the time this game rolls around. I'm not sure Rutgers is either. But I do think that Jed Fish is probably out of all the coordinators here, the best offensive, like the one that you'd probably put a little money on if you were going to. This is maybe Washington by 7, I think, in this game. This Nebraska game is a really tough one for them. Nebraska defense is the unit that you would absolutely put your faith in here. I think this feels about right. Nebraska, 7, maybe as much as 10 if they really get the offense going. Wisconsin, again, if Tyler Van Dyke, can clean things up, 10 feels about right. UCLA, this one is an over projection for the Bruins. I think this is probably closer to like 5 or 6, but I would have the Bruins favored in this game. USC, I've talked about, I think this is an under projection for them. I think this is probably closer to 12 or 14. This is a tough one. They're going to need some turnovers to be able to hang in this game. Then comes this, at least a couple games you like them to be able to hang around in. Minnesota definitely looks like they might have some of their struggles this season. It's still early. We only have the one game in the books. I like Rutgers' chances in this game, though, at home. They might need to finish +1 or +2 on turnovers, but they could definitely get out of there with a win. Maryland, again, this one feels like a reasonably tight-ish game, something to keep an eye on. Illinois, again, like another game that you can absolutely hang in. Michigan State feels like it's tougher by the time you get here. I mean, look, the Spartans could have their depth issues too, but this feels like a game that, Jonathan Smith's guys should have things figured out by. They're going to need to get some luck, I think, if they're going to make it to a bowl this season. Willing to be proved wrong, though. All right, the Bruins, who are a bit of a mystery coming into this year. Deshaun Foster is your head coach. Eric Bieniemy is your new offensive coordinator. That's an exciting hire. I mean, Andy Reid's definitely your play caller for the Chiefs, and Bieniemy kind of wondered looking for his head coaching shot. I think here's his shot to come in and call plays. I think that's a really big opportunity. Ka Malo is your defensive coordinator. It's going to be really interesting for them. Offensively, they took a massive step backward last year. Ethan Garbers is your quarterback. He played most of last season too. 67.1% completion, 7.8 per. It's kind of a flip. Defensively, they kind of struggled to figure it out under Chip Kelly, and offensively, they'd largely been able to piece it together every year. Last year, they just could not get anything going on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they were really good. Major step forward under new USC defensive coordinator Danton Lynn. They had arguably the best player in college football on the defensive side last year, in Latu. He's off to the NFL, of course, so they're going to be replacing a lot. Just a lot of questions, I think, about this team. Special teams were really bad last year. That's another thing to keep an eye on. They're going to need to improve the kicking game. Offensively, they do return a decent amount of production. Defensively, a lot less. The coaching and development's been really bad. We've had UCLA at 37 and 23, at 24 and 22. But their 2-year rolling recruiting is at 21 overall. I mean, relatively speaking, the Bruins still do recruit pretty well. They don't always put a comparable product on the field. They really struggled with drive efficiency last season. They just could not put together long drives to put up points. They struggled with explosive drives as well. Too many 3 and outs, too many turnovers. They were a lot better running the ball than they were throwing the ball. Kelly's sort of signature when he was at UCLA was having a tight end that they could really get the ball to. They couldn't really figure that out for themselves last season. Defensively, this is a much nicer radar chart. I feel like I've said that a lot in the Big Ten. Defensively, this is a much nicer radar chart. Outside of Oregon, that's mostly been true. Yeah, so they did find ways to avoid giving up long drives and avoid giving up points last year. Their explosive drives number was really good. Their negative drives number, they forced a lot of 3 and outs, forced a lot of turnovers. They were very good both against the run and the pass. I'm interested to see what they're able to put together with the new defense, some new defensive coaches and, some new faces in there this season. This is a 12-game FCS schedule. We have them projected at 7 wins. I have talked about, I think they're a little over projected at 32, but they have a big range of potential outcomes. They could maybe beat this projection if the coaching staff actually turns out to be really good. We just don't know because we haven't seen a lot of these guys coach college ball. So TBD. They do get a nice opener at Hawaii, a team that's still digging themselves out of the Todd Graham hole, or maybe a Todd Graham size hole. What a jerk. Anyway, Hawaii, UCLA should run away with this one. If it's close, that's not a good sign for the Bruins, even in a small sample. They get an Indiana team that they should beat. They should be better than this Indiana team that had to replace their coach after last season. This is maybe closer to 7 points, though. I think I'm not sold on the Bruins. Oddly enough, both LA teams play LSU there. This is on the road. This is going to be a really tough game for them. LSU, you could make an argument is over projected. I think the defense should rebound in a major way from how bad they were last season. I do like the new DC for them at Blake Baker. Offensively, they're going to take a step back without Jaden Daniels and Mike Denbrock. Sort of by how much do those two effects offset each other? I'm not convinced that LSU runs out and has a top 10 defense this season. I'm also not convinced that they run out and have a top 10 offense. I think it's going to make it hard to stick at number 4. My guess for them is they end up somewhere closer to the teens, which would still be pretty good for them. I think, and maybe not make a lot of fans of Death Valley happy, but this is probably closer to 10 points though. Oregon, this game is probably closer to 21 points. I like this Oregon team a lot. Penn State, this is a really tough matchup too. This is a tough schedule to start out the season. You're overwhelmingly likely to be at 2-3 after that. Once you get done with Penn State, which is probably closer to 17 points. Minnesota, this is a game that the Bruins should win. I feel like this is probably 5 or 6 points at home. Rutgers, this is another game you should win. Nebraska is a more interesting one. This game, I would put Nebraska as a slight favorite, even with Nebraska on the road here. I just like where Nebraska's defense is likely to be. I think their offense does take a step forward into at least being not as terrible land. Iowa, again, we've got this projected a toss up. I think this is closer to Iowa, 5 or 6 points. Washington's a really interesting one this late in the season. Because like I said, like I think Washington has some depth questions at the offensive line that could be making themselves felt later on in the year. And of course, maybe you just get lucky and if you're Washington and you don't have any offensive line injuries, and that would be great. USC, this feels like a really interesting one too. This could be a tight game. I think USC is going to beat this projection. I think USC is actually likely to be favored by like 3 or 4, maybe 5 points in this game. And then you finish with the Fresno State game that's really winnable. I mean, look, you can talk yourself into bowl eligibility with this team, and I think that's reasonable. But I think there's, like I said, like there's just a big variance around where this team maybe finishes out. Speaking of big variances around where this team maybe finishes out, let me introduce you to the other team in LA. USC, Lincoln Riley's your play caller. Lincoln Riley's your head coach. Danton Lynn, formerly of Westwood, California, is now your defensive coordinator. Look, this Trojans team has just a ton of interesting questions in it as we come into this season. Offensively, they were number 8 overall last year. That was a bit of a step back for them from where they were the prior year. They were at 32 overall in 23 and 21 in 22. Like, they just have not been able to put it together under Lincoln Riley, even though he's had the number 1 draft pick on his team playing quarterback. Offensively last year, Caleb Williams covered up for a multitude of sins, pretty much all over the offensive field except at quarterback. I mean, they struggled with the pass catchers. They struggled with run blocking. They struggled with pass blocking. This was just not, I mean, outside of Williams, this felt like a really average offense. I'm really interested to see what they look like because they lose a ton of production on this side of the ball. Defensively, they were just really bad yet again under Alex Grinch. That, of course, brings you to the new defensive coordinator. I mean, look, I don't think that this is like, I mean, if I had to put money on which defense finishes out the year better between their defense, and LSU's defense, which was also really bad last year, I'd put money on LSU. I just think there's better continuity, better recruiting on the defensive side of the ball than the Trojans have. Just feels like there's a lot of problems still for the Trojans here on this side of the ball. I think if you can talk yourself into like a major improvement, if they can get into the 30s, that's huge given where they've been. Like, just even getting to the point where you're talking about like playing competent defense, that would be great. Miller Moss is your quarterback. I used to do a Pac-12 podcast up until last year, and there was a joke that we made about the funniest thing would be for USC is if Miller Moss just went out and had like a huge bowl game and somehow ended up winning the job. And that's where we are. So I'm really interested to see replacing the number 1 pick with Miller Moss. Like, and I'm not saying this is like Miller Moss can't play himself into like a camp invite, maybe a draft, like a later round draft pick as a quarterback. You're really, really feeling good and you're a USC fan. Maybe you're talking to yourself into like, maybe he's a round 2 pick or something like that, or something like, I mean, maybe in your wildest fantasies first round, but like, that's shit. There's a lot to fix here on this Trojan team. Coming into this year, they've really struggled at coaching and development. They're at 114 at overall, because when you recruit at number 16 and sometimes better in these last couple seasons, and you put the kind of product on the field that they have, like, you're just not really putting it together in coaching and development. They struggled a little bit last season in drive efficiency. If you watch them, you definitely saw this. You often saw Caleb Williams buying time to try to hit some big plays, because guys weren't getting open when they were supposed to. And then the offensive line couldn't hold the blocks as long as was potentially needed. Or they just couldn't hold the blocks from the get-go. But they were good at big plays. Their explosive drives number was better. Their negative drives number was really good. Caleb Williams, for all the pressure he was under last season, they did a really good job of avoiding 3-and-outs and avoiding turnovers. That is tremendous credit to him. They were a lot better throwing the ball than they were running the ball. Again, like, I think just so much of that was Williams last year. And just miss me with the bowl performance stuff. Like, any bowl game that is not a playoff game, like, you should apply a massive discount to anything you see. It's like a Pro Bowl in there. Defensively, Last year, they struggled to find ways to avoid giving up long drives. They gave up a lot of big plays. Their negative drives, not forcing enough 3-and-out, not forcing enough turnovers, though that is a slightly better number for them. They really, really struggled to defend the run last year. They're going to have the front seven figured out. That's a really interesting question as we come into seeing them play LSU, what that looks like. And defending the pass, they weren't great at that either. This is a 12-game FBS schedule, and we've got them at 5.24 wins. So they're going to need to pick it up because this is a tough schedule. This LSU game to start out, like, look, we've got LSU favored by a lot. I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think you could argue LSU's overprojected as USC is underprojected. There's a bit of a scissors effect then. I think you can argue this is probably closer to like a touchdown, but I do think it's LSU is the better team coming into this. I think they have a better roster. I really like Lincoln Riley as an offensive play caller. I think there are questions about the two new guys that, the new offensive coordinator at LSU replacing Denbrock and replacing a ton with Jaden Daniels. I just think that they've got fewer questions coming into the year. Then you get a Utah State game. That's a game you should absolutely win. They should be favored. I think that they could win that by as much as 15. This Michigan game is really interesting. This is probably closer to 7 on the road, but it's still a tough game. Michigan's probably got still, even with the personnel losses, a more complete roster than USC does. Riley, for better or worse, as we head into year 3, it feels like there's a lot of roster holes still. Wisconsin, we've got this projected as a toss-up. I think this is likely USC by 5 or 6. Minnesota, this is probably closer to 10. Then it really gets tough again. This Penn State team, I think there's a lot of very reasonable excitement about coming into the season. We talked about this. This game, you can talk yourself into this being Penn State by 10, Penn State by 7, but I think we're probably going to have it closer to 10 by the time we get there. That's with USC beating the projections. Maybe it's not. Maybe USC beats the projections by a lot. I still think Penn State's favored, even with the game at home. Then you get a little bit of a break. You get Maryland and Rutgers. Those are 2 games you should win. Those are, I would, put both of those games, add 5 or 6 points to each of those. This Washington game, I do like USC to be favored in this game. Again, Washington's depth struggles could be a real problem here. This Nebraska game is really interesting because Nebraska's defense should be really good in this game. USC's defense may not be good enough, to like totally slow down and improve Nebraska offense. This could be an interesting one to watch. I think this game, I think you can make a reasonable argument that this game could be pretty close. I do think that they should be favored over UCLA. I'm not saying it's by a lot or anything like that, but I think that they should be favored in that game. This Notre Dame game is a tough one. We're probably talking about 7 to 10 points again here, much like the Penn State game. It is also at home. But I mean, this is a really rough schedule, even though you managed to miss both Oregon and Ohio State here. You have a bunch of games where you're going to be an underdog. You have a couple, a handful of other games where I think you can make a reasonable argument that it's going to be pretty tight. And you have the potential with Notre Dame and Penn State to take 2 losses, take two tough losses at home, plus, LSU on national television. I think there's a reasonable argument with even going and getting Lincoln Riley. He could be under some pressure coming in the next season. All right. Wisconsin. Oh, wait. Washington. What am I doing? Washington. I can almost do alphabet. I can almost remember what the letter ordering is. All right. Washington, Jed Fish is your head coach, formerly of Arizona, did a terrific job turning around the Wildcats. We've got them projected at 31 overall. Jed Fish is also your offensive play caller. Steve Belichick, that's Steve Belichick, son of, so it's Belichick the younger, is your defensive coordinator. Oh gosh, we're almost to the end. I could almost stop talking. Offensively, they were really good last season, number 10 overall. They were at number 22 on defense. They did make a significant step forward on defense. This still wasn't a great defense last year. And offensively, like, they definitely had some on and off moments, particularly down the back stretch last season. But in the big games, up into that Michigan game, they were just on. The 2 Oregon games, the game against Texas, when the lights got bright, Washington absolutely showed up. And then a bunch of other games in the back half, they walked face first into a bunch of walls. Anyway, as well as the national title game. On the special teams last season, they were pretty good. Number 12 overall. You definitely like that number to continue. Man, they don't have a lot coming back. They're at 132 in returning production on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you just lose a ton. The wide receivers, the quarterback, the offensive line has, so little coming back. I think there's just a ton of questions about whether they even have enough guys to make it through the year on that side of the ball, to be frank. Defensively, they return, a bit more. But I still think that they might have some depth struggles here. Their coaching and development number is pretty good because their 2-year recruiting is not great. I mean, DeBoer was not a gangbusters recruiter for Washington. They're going to have to pick this up, I think, for Washington's expectations for who they want to be in the Big Ten are going to come through, even though I do think Fish does a really good job developing talent and like I said, is a heck of a play caller, in college. I maybe wouldn't hire him from the pros, but he's a good college play caller. Offensively last year, this was not a super efficient offense last year for them. That should pick up under Fish. I mean, I should say it should pick up under, like, Fish's offense was really efficient when Fafita was running it. I feel like I feel like he maybe had a bit of a Jaden DeLora problem, and we'll see what it's like with Will Rogers, who's your likely quarterback. Coming over from Mississippi State, 59.9% completion percentage, 6.9 per. They were really explosive last year. Fish is, again, like, he's a really good college offensive play caller. I think that they're largely going to work. Arizona was number 5 last year on offense. They did a really good job. Fish, you're going to, I think you may notice some fall off this year, but I think in the long run, you're not going to notice a huge fall off between what Washington was running with Grubb and DeBoer and what Fish runs as far as like putting points up if he's able to get his guys in. They did a really good job avoiding 3-and-outs and avoiding turnovers last year. They were heavy pass dependent. That's no big surprise. They really threw the ball last season. Defensively, they were pretty good at drive efficiency. They found ways to avoid giving up long drives. Explosive drives, they could definitely give up some big plays last year. Negative drives, they were decent here, forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers. They were pretty good against both the run and the pass. No big holes there. We've got them about 7.11 wins, when you count in the FCS game. They definitely get to, kind of ease into it a little bit. This Eastern Michigan game, an FCS game. And then Washington State. Washington State's likely over projected a little bit. Now, they didn't get hammered like Oregon State did with some of the, the players transferring out, but the Cougs definitely are likely to take a step back from where they have them at 35 overall. The Beavs also lost the coaching staff. The Cougs are in a little bit of a better position. I do think this is probably closer to Washington by 5, but it's not a ton. Washington does have some holes that we talked about coming into the season. Then it eases up a bit. They should be favored over Northwestern. Don't turn the ball over a couple times and you should be fine. Rutgers, don't turn the ball over 3 or 4 times and you should be fine. Schedule tightens up a bit here in the middle for a little bit. You get Michigan. This is a tough game. I think this feels pretty fair here at 8. And this game is at home, but 8 feels about right here. For this one, Iowa, like we talked about, this game is a toss-up. I probably put it at Iowa by 3 or 4. I think Iowa's defense is likely to be just excellent again. I think the new offensive coordinator can at least get you to something. And that's, like we talked about, you can bet on Phil Parker a bit in here. Then the schedule lightens up a little bit. I think this Indiana game's completely winnable. They should be favored in this game. This USC game feels pretty tight. You can talk yourself into it being a bit of a toss-up. I think USC may be favored by 2. or 3. Schedule then tightens up again. Look, this Penn State game is going to be a really tough game for them. Penn State, I think, like if Washington has depth issues that show up by the time we get to here, this could be a real problem. UCLA, again, like huge variance about where this team ends up. You can talk yourself into UCLA being in the 40s. I think that Washington's probably favored by 2 or 3. Of course, Washington has some O-line issues. Wipe that all out. Oregon, I think Oregon should be a significant favorite against Washington this year. Barring the Ducks turning the ball over a couple times, just very different teams coming into this season than they were last year. The Ducks went all in this season. Washington, it's likely not your year here, but a couple turnovers, couple dumb things that if the Ducks do it, it could go your way. All right, now let's do the Badgers. All right, Luke Fickell's your head coach. We've got them projected at number 44 overall. Phil Longo's your offensive coordinator. Interesting hire that did not pay huge dividends last year. Mike Tressel, who came with Fickell from Cincinnati, who's a really good defensive coordinator, as your DC. They were pretty bad offensively last year, number 77 overall. They really struggled. Defensively, this isn't the number you'd like. I think they know they're going to have their work cut out for them a little bit, getting things turned around, but I do expect that they get the defense turned around in particular here. They could certainly use a little help on special teams as well. They don't return a ton on the offensive side of the ball, but the defense does return a bit. That's part of why we have them projected where they are. I think there's a reasonable case that the defense just gets better. Their coaching and development's not great. We had them at 59 and 23 and 34 and 22. Wisconsin's not like an amazing recruiting team, but they definitely are recruiting better than they are playing of late. Tyler Van Dyke from Miami is your starting quarterback, 65.8% completion percentage, 8.1 per. Offensively last year, they really struggled to put long drives together. Longo's not necessarily known for that. He's a bit more of a home run hitter. But they weren't great at explosive drives either. So being a home run hitter didn't help a lot there. Their negative drives number, too many 3 and outs, too many turnovers. They were really bad at running the ball and throwing the ball. Just a lot to clean up and get right on the offensive side of the football for them. Defensively, not as bad. Still not great, but not as bad. They were decent at drive efficiency, finding ways to, avoid giving up big plays, decent at explosive drives. And pretty good at negative drives, finding ways to force 3 and outs, force some turnovers. Not a big run pass split, pretty good against both. I'm somewhat bullish that this defense gets up into the top 20 this season. I think that's probably their cap, but it is a good coaching staff. So we'll see there. Offensively, I think that's where mileage may vary, but it could be pretty interesting. Longo's been pretty good at times in the past. He's rarely been really bad. Van Dyke feels like a guy that could really maybe open some things up for them. We've got the projected at 6.41 wins when you add in the FCS game. And the schedule, it's got some toughies on there, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's horrible. So you start out with a tune-up with the FCS game and then Western Michigan, which probably is going on right this very moment. Then you get Alabama. This should be a really tough game. I mean, I like this Alabama staff. Alabama projects at number 7. This isn't like the tippy top of the Nick Saban era, but this is still a really good team. I don't think Wisconsin's really set up to exploit what of some of Alabama's weaknesses may be, which would be in the secondary. This should just be a really tough one. 14 points feels about right. USC is an interesting one. We've definitely talked about and I think there's a reasonable case, like I said, that you could make that Tyler Van Dyke opens some things up for them. Defensively, they take a step forward. They're not going to be so far away from where USC is. This is probably 4 or 5 points. I would have USC favored at home. Then you get a game that they're going to need to likely win this Purdue game here. I think you can make an argument this is a pretty tight game. These teams feel pretty evenly matched to me. They get Rutgers, even though it's on the road, I like them to win this game. 10 points feels about right. Northwestern, like I said, maybe they get it together offensively with Lujan as your offensive play caller. In that case, maybe you can talk yourself into a little bit of them beating this projection. In that case, then this game might be a little bit tighter, but I think 7 feels about right for me for this game. Penn State's a tough one. I do think the Nittany Lions live up to this projection that we have for them, and that the offense takes the necessary step forward coming into this year. 15.5 points may seem like a lot. If Wisconsin beats this projection, maybe it's down around 10 or something like that. But this still feels like a pretty tough game for them. This Iowa game's a really interesting one because it is kind of tough down this back stretch. We have them as a slight underdog here, but Iowa could beat this projection. Like Wisconsin might need a turnover or two here on the road. Then you get a really tough game against Oregon that you likely don't have much of a shot in unless you force a bunch of turnovers, catch some luck. Nebraska, on the other hand, this is an interesting game. Like we talked about, like you can probably put a lot of weight behind that Nebraska defense here. I think Wisconsin's defense is likely going to be good enough though to slow down whatever offense Nebraska has, which makes this game interesting. Maybe a low scoring affair, probably pretty tight. I think Nebraska might be favored in this game, but I would have it as a toss up. Minnesota's a game they should likely be favored. I'd probably put that around 10 points. All right. We have an interview. Hold on. All right. We have an interview with Nicole Auerbach of NBC Sports. She's joined us to talk and help preview the Big Ten. I'm really excited for you guys to see this interview. And then we'll be back after that to close. Hi, and welcome back. We're here with Nicole Auerbach, now of NBC Sports, exclusively, not with The Athletic anymore. And helping to cover the Big Ten, which NBC Sports now has some rights to. Excited to have you here, Nicole, to talk through and preview the Big Ten with us.
Yeah. I mean, do we have like hours and hours? The 18 teams is a huge conference now, but no, seriously, excited to be here. And it's going to be an adventure this year. Like it's going to be totally different the way that I think we consume and talk about these teams in these mega conferences.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I keep thinking this in my head. Like, I'm not sure folks are ready for what successful season. I mean, like, I think NFL fans are quite ready, of course, for like, hey, if you go 10-6.
Right, but like, what if you're 9th place in the Big Ten? That's still in the top half of the league, right? Like,
I know.
Is that positive? Is that good? Yeah, I agree. And also, I don't think we're ready for the insane tiebreakers that all of these conferences have to implement. So November is going to be an exciting time, I think, for all of us trying to do the math on everything.
And we'll talk about it a little bit, like with the quirks of scheduling, right? I mean, now, I mean, there was always this sort of like with the Big Ten West. But now, like who your misses are can matter a lot, particularly for like a team in the middle or a team in the upper middle that might have playoff aspirations. Let's start out like with the newcomers. I feel like that's a good place to start. The Ducks are really in a good place, I think, to lead off, right? I mean, I think everyone's really focused on Ohio State being all in for the title this year. I think in NIL, they really went out and made some big changes. And of course, they brought in, a new offensive coordinator. But I really thought Oregon going out and getting Dylan Gabriel was a big move for them. I thought he was probably the most plug and play, ready to go college quarterback on the market if you're going to throw the ball around. And they kept Will Stein on as offensive coordinator and retain most of the staff. I'm incredibly confident that the Ducks are going to have a great offense this year, but the Ducks defense has only been pretty good under Lanning. Can they put it together enough defensively coming into this season to, I think, really, make the title run that I think people maybe not outside of Eugene are talking about, but I think people in Eugene are talking about?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm with you completely. We did a spring road trip for NBC and we went to 5 programs and we didn't go to practice at Ohio State. We saw the spring game. So that's a different dynamic. But of the teams we saw practicing, I mean, Oregon looked ready to play. Like they could have played a game 2 days from the day we were at practice. It was just like, it was clockwork. Execution level was just really high. Like they just looked totally ready to go. So I think that I will be shocked if it's not, Ohio State and Oregon in some order at the top of the conference. And I think both these teams should definitely be in the CFP with the mulligans that everyone gets these days. But I'm with you. I mean, I think the offense is going to be really good. I think it's a luxury. You mentioned Dylan Gabriel and all the experience he has, But you've also got Dante Moore, who is willing to sit as the backup and then be ready next year, which is kind of crazy in this era of college football. Will Stein, awesome. Really enjoyed getting to spend some time with him. I have to think that Dan Lanning's experience with some of the best defensive coaches that have ever coached in this sport is going to pay off. And like, if they need the defense to get a couple stops, that they can do that. I know also, there's people are like, all right, can they win the big game? Right. Because of the 2 losses to Washington, which like, if anyone watched those games, like, again, like a 4th down or like a couple of moments.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that. And I'm honestly not too worried about the defense, because I don't know how many teams or how many games it would be, potentially the deciding factor,
right?
Just considering how loaded they are. But I'm really intrigued by Jabbar Muhammad transferring there and being an integral piece of the defense. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the way that Dan Lanning has built, the way he recruits, the way that they build them, like the way that they do their offseason programming, I just have to believe that the defense will do what it needs to do to make this one of, I think, again, one of the best teams in the country, in the small group of teams that I think can win it all.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think people fixated on outcomes with Lanning, and I think it's sort of a knock that you hear a lot from Washington fans. But I think it's very coach speak, that process. I think if you look at Lanning's process, like, and who he's hired and how he's gone about recruiting and like his in-game decisions, like, I think he clearly understands what it takes to win. He just has been on the unlucky side of the draw a few times. And truly, like, Washington showed up with a great scheme for both of those games to take on what was a bit of a weakness for Oregon, which is their pass defense last year. Right.
And we all thought, that like Washington's offensive line couldn't hold up in those games, and they did. Yeah. Right. So like, again, that's why I play the games, but I really couldn't be higher on Oregon coming into this season. And I think that, I know we're going to talk about schedules and how it favors certain teams. But And not really going to focus on this too much, but just like, obviously Oregon gets Ohio State at home.
Yeah.
It's not like the be all end all because of the 12-team playoff and the way that this is all going to go. But I do think that being in the Big Ten, getting a game like that against Ohio State and some of the other teams they're going to play, I do think that's going to help them from they're going to constantly be in the conversation.
Yeah.
Because, that's sometimes been a problem with West Coast teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Speaking of the sort of the reason this all happened, I mean, and when Texas and Oklahoma went to the SEC, my immediate thought was like, oh, it's going to be USC and UCLA, is the Big Ten move. Like, that was the obvious one that was still on the table. You could talk me into any number of potential USC outcomes, but I'm pretty sure the defense is going to get better with the new defensive coordinator. I just think they have enough talent that I'm not sure we're talking about like a V-shaped recession, where they just bounce right back. But I do think that they should get significantly better than they have been just by having some decent play calling and scheming going on.
Well, don't they have like 3 or 4 coaches who've been defensive coordinators on this? Like, it was just like, let's just bring everybody.
Right.
We're just going to throw all of these good defensive coaches in this room and fix this thing. So give me what's your range?
Yeah, I mean, I can have, but I mean, like the flip of it is like the offense really worries me. I mean, like Caleb Williams covered for a multitude of sins on the offensive line in his time at USC. I thought the receivers last year were absolutely underwhelming. They took Dorian Singer, who was really good at Arizona, and made him completely anonymous at USC. I could easily see them going 0-4 against LSU, Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame, even if they're a better team than they were last year overall. I mean, what seems sort of reasonable for the Trojans? I mean, I could easily see an 8-win Trojan team that is actually better, but has a bit of more of a tough schedule. And like Notre Dame's no joke. LSU has some questions, of course, but like they miss Ohio State, but Penn State is I think a reasonable dark horse, and Michigan, like I think is, even though they're rebuilding with a lot, like they have a decent enough stability that you feel confident that the roster at least knows where they're going and know where they should line up.
Well, and I mean, if you look at this matchup specifically, I mean, you feel really good about Michigan's defense, right? If we're going to talk, right, we'll get to that later in the preview. But I'm with you. I have a lot of questions. I remember being extremely surprised that USC didn't go add a quarterback out of the portal, that they decided that Miller Moss was going to be the guy. Is that the right call, right? Like, are you going to have, you're not going to have a Caleb Williams type, a Kyler Murray type who can just scramble around and make magic happen. Look, we haven't seen Lincoln Riley shift his offensive philosophy as much as I think we're going to see it this year, just based on skill set. Yeah. Maybe. That's going to be really interesting. I'm wondering about the depth at the running back position. They're going to have to, again, have pass catchers. So if that's receivers, if it's tight ends, like they're going to have to figure something out. But I think the biggest question is like, was this the right quarterback decision? Yeah. And all of that's going to fall squarely on Lincoln Riley, because I agree with you. The defense is going to be better because it has to be better. And you have a lot of competent people in there, and they should have gotten rid of Alex Grinch. Yeah. If not like this time last year, before that, whatever it was, but like doing that midseason was not going to automatically fix things. But I've got some questions too. I do think that they are going to be, a tough out. I do think like it's not going to be last year's team on both sides of the ball, but I am with you in the range of possible outcomes. Like when you say Penn State, man, like, I don't know between those teams. Like the questions I have about both those teams, like that's a perfect measuring stick matchup, because both of those teams want to be in the top group. And I'm not sure they're there yet. Well,
LSU too. LSU has the only team, oddly enough, in that group that I think people are actually a little low on, and some of it may just be, the general Notre Dame hatred in the sport is, the team I'm most confident there is Notre Dame. But like Penn State's offense should be better. We'll cover, I think I have there's some reasonable questions defensively about where Penn State ends up under new defensive coordinator. But USC, I think, I used to do a Pac-12 podcast, and we made a joke in particular heading into bowl season that the funniest potential outcome would be like Miller Moss just going and balling out in the bowl game and winning the job.
And it's just like such a strange outcome, considering his history and his trajectory and the way that Lincoln Riley has done the quarterback position. It's so unusual.
Well, and and we'll cover this when we get to the Buckeyes. It was an underwhelming, outside of, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly with Cam Ward, but outside of Cam Ward, and Dylan Gabriel, it was a really thin quarterback, transfer port. So even when you're talking about, like, when they were talking about like Will Howard to USC, I was just thinking like, what world does Will Howard make sense in like a Lincoln Riley offense?
Right. No, I think that's a really good point, because I'm with you. I think Dylan Gabriel was the surefire thing. Yeah. Experience. You've seen him win big games. And then everyone else just kind of had questions. And like, I get why everyone talked themselves into the ones they took, and like the systems and all of those things. But again, it just still surprised me because of the track record here, and Lincoln's been really good at bringing guys in, even if it's a 1-year deal, and getting them in the system and winning. So that's going to be really, really fascinating. I think, to me, that's more interesting to see how this goes than just like, hey, is the defense going to be better? Are they going to be able to tackle now? Like, I hope that they fix that this offseason.
Yeah, no, I truly they were number 8 in the model on offense last season. And that was a lot of Caleb Williams, and the number 1 pick is, you're losing the number 1 pick, and everybody else was pretty meh. That just worries me about this team coming in, for a team that's really like under Riley's entire tenure has had to hang their hat on the offensive side of the ball. So let's flip it up to Washington. I think Jed Fish is a heck of an offensive coach. This is the argument I made to distraught Arizona fans, and then a bunch of like people that only watch pro football when he got hired as the Arizona head coach. I was like, you know what, the guy can coach some offense. But Washington is absolutely in a full rebuild mode after losing so many talented players, and the schedule. And I think the offensive line played pretty well at points last year. I think they had but I also think that they had a little bit of 2019 LSU going on, and that the receivers were quite good, and Penix knew where they were supposed to be when they were breaking open. The schedule's not horrible for Washington, but you do have Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon. And they, those are pretty definite games where you're expecting them to be an underdog, coming into that. But then you get Iowa, USC, and maybe even UCLA in the range that like I kind of feel like you could be talking yourself into like maybe no more than 5 points either way, right? And I mean maybe not with UCLA, but we'll see. But can Fish cobble together enough to go 500? I mean, like he didn't lead a mass exodus out of Arizona, but he did get the running back. He got Prysock, the good cornerback. I'm not sure they have enough bodies to make it through on the offensive line, for him to put it together. And I say this too, after having watched Fish do this twice, it's quite possible he picks the wrong quarterback out of practice. I definitely watched a lot of some guys that never should have taken some snaps at Arizona under Jedd Fish.
There were a couple of examples, and he wasn't the only one, but once Noah Fafita started playing, you're like, oh, wow, look, these teams have lucked into like bad injury luck to inch their way into the right part.
Oh, no, he unlocked the whole offense in a way that Jaden DeLore just mostly ran around.
So that's an interesting dynamic to this. I am deeply concerned about just the bodies, like you said, with the offensive line. Now, this was a pretty, like, in terms of like looking at first year coaches and what they inherit, like this is definitely the barest of bones.
Yeah.
And you're still dealing with like, oh, you were in the national championship game last year. And it's like, actually, this is like an entirely different team, an entirely different coaching staff. So you are, it's just really hard to figure out like what they're going to look like, what their identity is exactly going to be, right? You can like look at some of the things that they did at Arizona, especially offensively, and see how, again, if you can protect the quarterback, like how it can work. But when I was there in the spring, they, everywhere you go, the SID prints out, here's the roster with everyone's numbers. Like Washington's was like a page and then like a little bit of names. It was so like they were so understaffed and they were not near the scholarship maximum. They didn't have enough offensive linemen to really do like a full spring game. Like there were just, and again, I know that's what the portal's for, these late ads to plug, play, to fix these things, or at least put Band-Aids on them for year one. But that stuff it's just concerning.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault. It's no one's fault, but it's just like those things are going to be hard, and the wear and tear of a league now like this, where like, even if you do, kind of get a favorable schedule, like it's still like very physical week in and week out. You're going to be on the teams that have to travel more than the other ones. Like there's just, if that stuff is going to matter, it could matter for a team like Washington that might not have the depth at some of those position groups. But like, I really like the coordinator hires and obviously bringing along Brennan. I think that they will figure it out. And I think, anything that's close to like a 500 record is a huge win, just because like this is a total question mark. And they're going to be so young, and then they're going to be, so inexperienced too.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely didn't go out and hire like Johnny Nansen again. Like he, thank goodness he ended up with Dwayne Aquina on staff, right? Like I do think that Belichick Jr. is a good hire. I think that could potentially help. I think some of the Big Ten fans that have like said like, oh, they're not ready for the line play in the Big Ten. Like if there's a team where it might be true, it's probably Washington, because Washington's not ready for the line play anywhere.
Right. Like I was gonna say, like if this was last year's team, that would not be a thing.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I talked myself into that for the Oregon-Washington games, which didn't end up happening the way that I thought they were going to go. But like, that's not styles of play. That's just like bad timing on a rebound.
Yeah. So the last of the newcomers, and the one that probably only got in because of TV market, well, in academics, I mean, UCLA is completely under the radar in the offseason. Yeah. Some of it is that the coach seems to find interviews incredibly uncomfortable. But
did you know that they're in LA?
I've heard this about. I have been to the Rose Bowl, which is sort of in LA.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Yeah. It is as beautiful as everyone.
Now UCLA, that is in LA. But the ironically for them, like the offense, I mean, ironically, because Jeff Kelly got an offensive coordinator job, the offense is what absolutely collapsed for them last season. And this was a team that was carried by a top 10 defense, but Latu and the defensive coordinator are gone. I think there's a reasonable argument he was the best defensive player in college football last season. They have a truly brutal stretch early in the season. Somehow LSU is playing both LA teams this season.
Yeah, we gotta remember that they're not in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Because their schedule very new Big Ten.
I'm just like, is there some just marquee recruit they knew about they wanted to get to on the West Coast? But they get LSU, Oregon, and Penn State right in a row, which I think could be difficult. I mean, like if they can get through that with their feelings intact, the schedule actually gets a little Big Ten West-ish in terms of quality, right? Like could the Bruins eke out a bowl out of this? I mean, like it feels, I definitely feel like about this staff and also, I mean, like I've seen the Ethan Garber's movie at Washington and at UCLA both. I just have a ton. I mean, I feel like I guess I have a ton of questions about Washington. I'm just like UCLA feels like an utter mystery to me coming into this season.
So you sent over some topics and you were like UCLA bowling ? And I was like, with this schedule, like, because first of all, I mean, some of this is going to come down to like, hey, how much better is Nebraska? Like,
right.
How are some of those teams? But I mean, that brutal stretch early, like it can make or break your season because it could just wipe you out.
Yep.
And that's definitely a concern that I would have with this team. I feel like the biggest thing is about Sean Foster. Like, who is he as a head coach?
Right.
Like, he gets thrown into this last out of everybody. What does this thing look like? And what is that? How do they want to play? How do they want to handle these types of games? But I think with the Ethan Garber's thing, like, I think we saw a lot of good, right? We've seen the flashes. You've seen like why he's the guy. Can they keep him upright? I mean, this was a team that like could not, they were like one of the worst teams in the country at allowing sacks. I feel like every time I was watching a UCLA game, he'd do something and then get sacked like 4 times.
Yeah.
Like that's just how it felt to watch UCLA. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm cautiously optimistic as long as they, again, don't have like a rash of injuries or like some really bad loss in that stretch that like kind of spills over.
Yeah, I could honestly, like, I mean, like this is, I'm going to offend all of the Big Ten fans when I say this, but the league's been pretty top heavy for a while, right? Like, and it is not, I think a lot of Big Ten fans think that there's a ton of depth to the league in the way that maybe you could argue about the SEC most seasons. That's maybe not been as much of the case since like, some of the other programs like Wisconsin haven't like checked in where maybe you would expect for a couple seasons. So like when I look at the schedule, I do think that like, hey, if some of these Big Ten teams don't make a jump, like, UCLA's got a shot in some of these games for sure. Let's address like where Chip Kelly went, the scarlet and gray elephant in the room. Like I'm 1,000% sold on the Ohio State defense. Like I think there are two, like maybe there are actually 3 sure things coming into this season: the Oregon offense, the Georgia offense, and the Ohio State defense. Of course, like I'm really looking forward to their matchup. I think the best matchup of the season, the regular season is going to be their matchup against the Oregon offense. Yep. But I'm a lot less sold on the offense. Like we talked about this a little bit. Will Howard seems fine. The downfield accuracy is a bit of a question. Ryan Day's offense, and this is not his offense anymore, but when it was at its best, was a match of a power running game and downfield option routes, right? Like that, and like that. Now Clemson found a way to make it bite them in the butt because they didn't have an intermediate passing game in that playoff game in 2019. Now look, this is like, Kelly, and this is probably a bit of UCLA's problem now. Kelly was an ambivalent recruiter. We used to joke on the Pac-12 pod that he only recruited on Tuesdays. So this is easily the most talent Chip Kelly has ever coached. I mean, bar none. Like he didn't even recruit that well at Oregon, Willie Lyle's scandal notwithstanding. But his huge offensive numbers from the Oregon days were back in the offensive dark ages before 2016, right? Like they wouldn't stand up to, the numbers that we've seen 2017 forward. Can Kelly's scheme fix I mean, like I'm less fussed. Like I know Ohio State has a ton of like amazing wide receivers. They recruit wide receivers. They develop wide receivers. Like Will Howard's going to look good against some of the like lackluster competition. I'm less sanguine that downfield he's not going to throw some picks against some better teams like he did against Oklahoma State when he was trying to push the ball down the field a bit. But my real question is, can Kelly's scheme which is a pretty sophisticated NFL style run blocking scheme. Can it fix the run blocking issues which have plagued Ohio State since 2019? That's my real question, is like, can the offensive line, which has been the sort of like real weak link for Ohio State, actually get fixed under Kelly? Because that would allow them, I think, to sort of like reach the potential. And like, I live in Columbus, so I'm not an Ohio State fan, but I live in Columbus, Ohio, and like the natives are quite restless.
Yes. Oh, it's been a rough couple of years. It's like, I compare it to early Jim Harbaugh, and he couldn't beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
And it's just like uncomfortable. I know people want to make this like, is he actually on the hot seat or not? I'm just like, no. It's just like an uncomfortable existence when you're winning, whatever the percentage of games are, but like not the biggest ones. And those are the ones that everyone measures you by.
Right.
I am cautiously optimistic about the Ohio State offense as well. And I don't know if you are. You seem more skeptical, but
I think that there's a high floor.
I think that Quinshon Judkins helps with the concerns I have about the O-line. And I know they've had good running.
I was going to say, have they not had some?
Well, they didn't try. Well, okay.
I think they love run. I mean, like Ryan Day loved running the football, and then they couldn't.
There were games. Yes, agreed that some of it was they couldn't, but there were some where they just weren't. Like they were trying to have an explosive pass game or just pass. And you also had a bunch of injuries, and then I don't know. There's been like the running back stuff.
They brought in Kelly's own line coach from UCLA explicitly because I think that they knew the O-line was the problem, right? Like, I mean, that was.
It is. It 100% is. It's just funny thinking about that after we, like hand wringing for the defense and all of the issues for like a couple years. It's like, now we feel like pretty good about that one. So let's focus on the other.
Don't run obvious single high safety all the time, Kerry Combs, like that. I mean,
there were, that was they were frustrating to watch when they would have these two very obvious like deficiencies. And you couldn't like really see them get tested until like November. So you're like trying to buy into like defensive improvement or O-line improvement because they could run. Okay. You got a 200-yard rusher in one game. Great. Like we fixed it. But so yeah, I think that part needs to get fixed. I do think that with the way it all worked out with Bill O'Brien going to BC and then bringing in Chip, if you are someone who has to like really fully give up play calling, like really fully, hand off a lot of control, there's no one better for Ryan Day to do that to than Chip Kelly. So I think that part's good. I am interested to see in a world where offenses have all changed since Chip Kelly was the innovative one, what that looks like. But again, I really like Quinshon Judkins. I think he is a physical back. I think he will create some problems, or at least get in some defensive coordinators' nightmares to open some stuff up. But I also thought that maybe this, when you go and you're going to sign a quarterback out of the portal, is it going to be better than Will Howard? Like, is there going to be someone that had more of a sure thing? And again, that the market was weird. Yeah. There weren't a ton of like obvious super experienced starters, and he has a lot of experience. But yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the big question is, we just went through a year of watching Kyle McCord, where it was obvious that like he was a limitation, limited ability of the offense. I don't think Will Howard will do that, but you're right. I mean, like we'll have to see with the vertical passing game, how that looks. I will say, coaches, everyone's so high on Jeremiah Smith. Like you are going to see him do stuff as a freshman. When we were there in the spring, like Ryan was super high on him. And I don't think that they talk about a guy like that unless you're like, you believe he's going to live up to it. So I do think, again, if you can get the ball to these guys, you can get the ball to Quinshon Judkins in space, like you're going to be good. I mean,
I think people should be preparing themselves. I keep telling people in Columbus is like, nobody loves to hit the tight end like Chip Kelly since he came back from the NFL. Right. Like, and I'm like, you should just like, if you wanted to put money on who might be one of your leading receivers? It's probably the tight end in this offense. But I'm just interested to see this. Like, I mean, Chip Kelly, when it works, I mean, he made Wilton Spate work at UCLA, sort of, offensively, right? Like,
I think it's going to. I think that he was just like clearly hated being a head coach and all the other stuff you have to do.
Yeah.
Plus, you're giving him like the most talented toys he's ever had to play with. Like, it's just. I think it's going to work. I think they're the best team in the country coming into the season. They're loaded.
Yeah.
I know we're both good on the defense, but like Caleb Downs is going to be absolutely like as good as advertised, if not better. I mean, so like, I think that they are the favorites. I think they are aware that it's national title or bust. It's not just beating Michigan. It's everything this year. So, we are going to have to see how it looks and how it fits together, but I do think Chip Kelly will do it.
Okay.
Get it done.
So let's flip to the as they say here, the team up north, Michigan. They feel like in a much better place than Washington for all of the huge production losses that they also suffer, as well as having some significant staff turnover as well. But Harbaugh was there for a good bit. The roster's a lot less than they definitely have some development that they've can hang their hat on there. They've got 3 tough games that I would sort of put in the toss-up range. I mean, I think they'll be an underdog, probably in at least 2 of them with Oregon and Ohio State. I'm probably a little less sanguine than maybe some others about Texas. I definitely need to see the quarterback actually take the step forward for them. But after that, you've got only 2 games against USC and Washington where they're likely to be favored. It feels like if the Wolverines were able to sneak out just one of the tough games against Texas, Oregon, or Ohio State, that you could potentially be talking about a 2-loss playoff contender. I mean, like, is that nuts for me? Like, I think people for this Michigan squad, like, it's very easy to write them off because of how much they lost and the coaching staff turnover. But I actually, when I looked at the schedule, I just thought like, they just need to pick off one of those games.
I think that's right. And I think that we're going to also see teams, again, maybe not this year, we'll see as the playoff exists, but like there's going to be 3-loss teams still in the mix.
Yeah.
So like we're just not going to be able to write people off, especially like if Michigan loses to Texas in week 2, in the old world, we immediately are like, all right, nope, there goes the playoff. Maybe they'll beat Ohio State, right? That's the one thing left. So that part is going to be really fascinating. Their schedule is brutal, right? Like it is, because those 3 games are huge, huge games. But like you look at the roster, you feel really good about the defense. You feel really good about the interior defensive line in particular. You look at the offense and you're like, all right, it's basically just Colson Loveland's back. Like that's basically that's about it. But he is probably the best tight end in the country. I at least would put him in that category coming into the season. And they had a lot of players who got a lot of experience because they were blowing people out because their schedule
that's true.
Great, until the end of the year. So like even, they're going to be saying, new starters, this and that, like they still had a bunch of the offensive playmakers that are going to be relied on more, all played and all did significant things. The interesting one is so I don't think they're going to have a Roman Wilson. Like they needed a number 1 receiver and they didn't have one.
Right.
And then they did last year. So you probably go back to like Loveland's probably going to be the leading receiver for this team. The run game, you lose Blake Corum. You have Donovan Edwards, who has had like 2 of the best individual performances as a running back in Michigan in recent memory, but then also was like invisible most of last season.
Yeah.
So can he be who he was against Washington? We've seen him against Ohio State. Can he do that? And then I like Khalil Mullings as well. So like there was a good portion of last year where he was better than Donovan Edwards. The biggest question, and it's going to take a while, or maybe, maybe people will make up their minds up off Texas or whatever, is going to be the quarterback position. And if it's Alex Orji, it's someone who's never thrown a pass in college football. So like,
I was going to say, I hadn't heard he never. Never. I was waiting for in college football. It's like he's never thrown a pass. But what are we trying here? We're going to do some single wing.
Yeah, I mean, but like, so this is the question. I mean, like, what is the offense look like? What can they throw the ball? How effective can they throw the ball? This is a team that loves to run the ball. I mean, Sharon Moore is going to do the same thing Jim Harbaugh did, where he's just like thrilled to win games that way. So again, like I think they can beat a lot of teams doing that.
Absolutely.
Like, even with the quarterback who, is not super explosive. And I've said this for a while. I know JJ McCarthy is out for the year, but I think he's going to do things in the NFL that we were like, whoa, he's capable of that. Because Michigan never tried it, never pushed it, never needed it.
A little bit like Justin Herbert, who was like who was good at Oregon, but like there were times at Oregon I was like, I don't think Justin Herbert can read zone, and I think it was just the scheme. Actually, it was just and the receivers were just not where they needed to be.
You see him in the NFL, you're like, oh my god, he's one of the best.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god. Yeah. So like, I think not that JJ's necessarily going to be like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but I do think that they didn't need certain things from him. And I think that this could be a situation where it is like a limiting factor on the way that they play offensively.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to, I don't know that it will necessarily cost them a lot of games. It certainly in the biggest games, you need to like, that's when you would need a great quarterback or like someone not to make mistakes, someone to get,
you need somebody to open it up if Jim Knowles has schemed you into a corner, right? Like,
right. But again, that game's at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Like Texas is the one where you're like more concerned. Texas and USC early, there's
and Texas's defense has been really good. I mean, Kwiatkowski has been excellent as I thought he would be. Eventually, I mean, like it wasn't great the first year, but they've really picked it up and like they carried that team last season.
I'm pretty high. Yeah. And I'm pretty high at Texas. So like, I think that that's probably a loss for Michigan, but I think that's going to tell us a lot about where they are offensively.
Okay.
And how the passing game works. But no, I agree with you. Like they're in a much better position than Washington. I think they could easily win 9 games, maybe 10 and be in the mix for the playoff. You've also still got like NCAA sanctions kind of hanging over things. Like we'll just see what's happened. But again, they dealt with all that last year. I think Sharon is going to be a good head coach. I think there is enough continuity on the staff. On the offensive side, everyone kind of just slid up a position. Defense will look different, but I like Wink. I think the defense will be one of the best defenses in the country. So yeah, I think I would not be surprised if they win more games than people seem to think they are going to.
So let's flip to another team that possibly had, other than Iowa, the most challenges throwing the ball down the field last year, but it's Penn State, like who I do think of as like a real dark horse with the offensive coordinator hire coming into. I mean, I think schematic. I mean, like I say this, there are times like I loved some of the other offensive coordinator hires on paper. So like I'm hoping that this one works out for them because they haven't really hit on one since like 2016, the last time they won the conference. Yeah.
Morehead, right?
So like I think there's tons of reason for optimism about the offense with the new OC. And I think there's plenty of talent. I think they had significant, I mean, it's weird to say considering Yurcich's background that they struggled to get the ball down the field, but I think that things will open up for them. But look, this team's been carried by the defense, and it's been excellent under the last 2 defensive coordinators. I wasn't sold on the Manny Diaz hire as DC. He really made it work. But that defense, I think, for Penn State to hold serve and to sort of have the improvement, like it has to stay excellent. Like if you were going to talk about like the biggest concerns that the Nittany Lions have had coming into this season, like I'm pretty sure the offense is going to improve on where they were. It's can the defense actually like maintain the level they've been at?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I love Abdul Carter. Feel great about him. I will see about like the entire unit. I agree. I mean, like it's been a while since, Tom Allen has been in the DC position. How aggressive is he going to be? What's he going to do that maybe he saw out of these players that did work in Manny Diaz's defense? What's going to be different? Like what's his handprint on this? And then again, obviously he's also got a lot of familiarity with a lot of these teams, but I am still concerned about the offense. Like Andy Kotelnicki is awesome. He's super creative. Like I do think that they will be better, but as someone who like was watching every week and like literally just waiting to try to count those explosive plays,
right.
Like they couldn't have, they had these great running backs that we saw that they were capable of doing it and then couldn't do it. I still just like, until I see it, until it looks easy again from Drew Aller. It's hard to 100% buy into this team. And I know we all use them as the poster child of like the team that benefits from the 12-team playoff. But like, I think there's a lot of pressure to make it this year.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Yeah. I mean, like Franklin can't keep finishing third right.
Like they have to, like, that barrier's gone.
Yeah.
They also don't have Michigan and Ohio State every year, both of them.
Right.
Like they have to do this, but so I just think, with them, like there have been other years where I'm like, yes, like all in, dark horse, 100%. I love the offensive coordinator hire. I like the Tom Allen hire. I just don't know until I see it with them, because I've fallen for Penn State. I picked them to last year. I was like, oh, they're going to beat Michigan or Ohio State. Like they're going to do it. And then Drew Aller was kind of like broken after the Ohio State game. Like something happened. They just had no confidence, couldn't complete pass. Like it was just, so until they do it, like I'm a little wait and see with Penn State.
Okay. So we're legally obligated to talk about the Iowa offense. Like that's, I heard Kevin Johns was getting an interview, and I immediately knew there's no way they'd hire him because he's actually good at being an offensive coordinator. Yeah. So, but Tim Lester should still be an improvement. Look, I mean, Phil Parker is, his back has to be sore from carrying both Forensis around for a while. So at least it's only one now. If that defense holds serve, which is a totally reasonable thing to assume given the production that they've had over the last decade, are we potentially talking about a top 15 in the counting, they're in the human polls, Iowa squad, given that they're kind of playing a Big Ten West schedule again, right? Like, I mean, the offense was horrendous. They were as bad offensively as LSU was defensively. And so like, even just getting to be a bad Power 5 offense or Power 4 these days, I guess, would be an enormous improvement, right? Like and the schedule isn't hard.
Yeah. If they were like 100th in the country instead of 130th, like in everything. Just average. Like they would have won just a couple more games.
Yep.
They would have been in the CFP hunt. They would have been in these situations. So their schedule, they get no Michigan, no Penn State, no Oregon, no USC.
Yeah.
They're like, that's really favorable. And it's also like, to your point, the bar is on the floor, right? So if the offense can only improve, I am concerned about Cade McNamara.
Yeah.
It seems like reports out of fall camp so far, not super great. And obviously he was coming off an injury as well. But they got Brendan Sullivan, they got a little bit of depth there. But it can only go up from here, and it has to improve. And then, again, you lose Torrey Taylor, the most valuable punter in the country.
Yeah.
So, I'm a little devastated by that, because that was one of my favorite parts of watching Iowa football. But I just think like they're so sound, special teams are so sound defensively. If you can get something closer to like average on offense, you're going to win a lot of games. And I do think that we're going to have to, like, we as a society kind of put teams in the Big Ten West in a bowl. And we were like, all right, your ceiling is the Big Ten West. And they never beat the East in the Big Ten championship game. So they were never really like in the playoff mix. Like they were, if in a couple of those years, like if they'd won the game, sure. Yes. But now these are the teams that are going to be very much alive in November, possibly. And we're going to be, going through
it's going to be wild.
Like, they're going to be flawed teams.
Yeah.
But they're going to have a chance.
Yeah.
And I think Iowa could be in that category.
Or no, they'll have that's the thing. It's like, it's not computers that'll be making, it's humans, and they'll be looking at wins and losses, and like, they'll be having people yell in their ear about like, oh, the Big Ten, and like in the meantime, Iowa has a whole bunch of misses on that schedule. Right. Like, so Wisconsin's an interesting one to me, because it's not like there's some recruiting juggernaut, but they've definitely underperformed recruiting of late, right? Like, there's still a lot of teams in college football that would trade rosters with the Badgers. The offense was terrible last season, and the defense, which is like the real Luke Fickell hallmark, was only okay. If they don't improve by a good bit this season, and, some of the not so tough games on their schedule are likely to be toss-ups, right? Like, what are real expectations in Madison for year two? Because I know they kind of, Paul Chris sort of was mailing it in, but I'm not sure what to make of this team. I liked the Longo hire, I thought it was a little out of left field for Fickell to hire Longo, but, I don't know what to make of this team, or where to expect significant improvement.
I think last year spent most of the season kind of just waiting for them to like be like, here's our clear offensive identity. Like, here are the air raid principles that the Longo is bringing. Here is, or, okay, nope, we have personnel to still run the ball and like to do things the Wisconsin way. And they were just so in between. They just like did not know what they wanted to be, and the quarterback play was really inconsistent. I think that you could argue, and I did, that Luke Fickell's year one was the most disappointing of all the first-year coaches last year, just because of what we expect from Wisconsin and like really not to take a dip, even if you're changing some things.
Yeah.
I do think they have the capability of being a team that like is contending to be in the CFP, right? Not just to win the West, like just higher ceiling, which I think the Longo hired signified.
Right.
I think we'll have a better sense of that offense this year, assuming Tyler Van Dyke stays healthy.
Yeah.
I was reading some stuff from camp. It sounds like he's healthier than he's been in the last couple of years. He's really banged up a lot at Miami. He had a bunch of different offensive coordinators at Miami. Like, maybe this works, right? But I think they need to take a significant step forward offensively. Like, I think they need to show like this is what we want to be and this is who we want to be, and not lose the games that they lost last year against the teams that like Wisconsin usually beats.
Yeah.
And again, I know it's a totally different head coach and all these different things, but like, when you're playing the Minnesotas and the Iowas and those types of teams like Nebraska, like you got to take care of business because you're Wisconsin.
Right.
So if you're not beating those teams this year, I think you have a problem.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Nebraska, I think they're turning into a Matt Rule team very quickly. They already have a very good defense. And a question.
It was significant improvement last year. Like, very obvious. Yes.
And a questionable offense. And they were they were terrible offense last season. And I think a lot of people are really expecting a miracle out of Dylan Raiola. But I'm not sold on Marcus Satterfield. I got to see Marcus Satterfield get Spencer Rattler and do literally nothing with him. That's in South Carolina, right? Like, I don't think he's the kind of offensive coordinator that is just being held back by a quarterback. Still, even getting just like Iowa a little bit to a bad Power 4 offense would be a huge improvement. The schedule, again, is exceedingly favorable with only the Ohio State game really out of reach.
This one is crazy. Like, I think we're gonna could they be 7-0?
No, I mean, like,
into Ohio State.
They feel like the conference. Like, I mean, like, there was a while for this was sort of true for some Big Ten teams, and it was often Iowa. But like, the conference's new most likely okay team with a record built on a very favorable schedule, right? Like, and that feels like Nebraska coming into this year.
Yeah, like, again, they could be. We've been talking about like Nebraska getting to bowl eligibility. They could be bowl eligible in the first 6 games.
Well, what would it? I mean, I guess an interesting question for Rule, who is pretty stubborn, is like, what would it? I mean, he did try in the NFL to like actually run an offense. But what would it take for him to like make a real offensive coordinator hire? I mean, like, how much ice? I mean, like, how thin is the ice on Satterfield? Because I get a hunch that it's not terribly thin. Like, I think Rule is happy to win games defensively. But I think the Raiola camp, probably does want to see him actually play good football at some point.
True, but maybe expectations are reasonable as a freshman, right? Like, maybe there's just going to be some time. I mean, I think the biggest sign of improvement that Nebraska could have offensively is just not turning the ball over as fast, right? So, like, when you talk about like where they need to, be middle of the pack, whatever, just be like not as bad, it's turnovers. Like, if you're not shooting yourself in the foot all the time, then their defense can hold those leads and they can win these games. But I think I'm with you in that I think Matt Rule is very comfortable winning games like that. I put Rutgers in that category as well. Like, solid defense, maybe running the ball, you're chewing off some clock, but like, you're comfortable enough in those games without like fireworks offensively. I do think that there should be some cushion, again, with the way the schedule sets up, with the defense that like really was sound. Like, that was I thought the biggest, most notable thing early in the year. Like, they were in the right spots and they were
absolutely.
They were like ending plays. Like, that was just something we hadn't seen in Nebraska in a few years. So I do think like you can bring along a highly touted, like, great, young quarterback in that situation. And I think, again, like, I think people are going to go wild with expectations early. Like, they're getting Colorado.
Yeah.
Again, early. And like, they're probably like still upset that they blew that game last year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And like, they're going to take out some anger on Colorado. They're going to have some of these wins. They're going to pile them up. And like, again, I think they could be bowl eligible by mid-October.
Right.
Get that monkey off their back. And then like, I mean,
lose to Ohio State by 100. And then,
but still, like, still
I know.
Season. So like, it's going to be fascinating, especially with that fan base that has been just crushed in the way that
they fascinate me because with this schedule, they could legitimately be like 10-2 with a disaster. I mean, just an absolute get obliterated by Ohio State. The kind of like
they would be thrilled.
Oh, they'd be thrilled.
So
but like, I mean, in the playoff
conversation,
like people would be in the playoff conversation and you'd have like half the like most of the country pointing at the Ohio State game of like clearly.
And they'd be like, these wins over like Illinois.
Right. Like, but we have 10 wins in the Big Ten. Right. So we're to end with like, I really, really like Jonathan Smith as a coach. Like his first year at Oregon State, I saw them in person here, open up against the Buckeyes, and the effect of the new coaching staff was immediate. It was evident in the play calling. They absolutely torched the Buckeyes on some like well set up tunnel screens in that game. I mean, it was a game they lost handily, but compared to where they were under the prior regime, which was a disaster, it was immediate, and they built from there, right? I think when he took over Oregon State, they had one of the worst rosters in college football, and that includes a lot of group of 5 teams at the time. But this Michigan State roster that he inherited is probably better than the one he left behind in Corvallis, right? Like he had a little bit of an island of misfit toys in Corvallis that they really made work. He's got Childs, and I really like the Rossi hire at defensive coordinator. Yeah. Does Michigan State surprise anyone this year? I mean, this is a little bit like they don't have like the A&M quality roster where you're like, oh, that like A&M hired a football guy. What if they actually focused on football? But I would say of like Jonathan Smith is like, and particularly on the offensive side of the football, I mean, I think they're going to do things.
So I am 100% with you. I thought this was like the obvious hire from the beginning. Like the only names that I thought made sense for Michigan State were him and Elko, as you just mentioned. He's off to A&M. But like, this is going to be fascinating because you talked about how Caleb Williams masks some things for USC. Kenneth Walker masked things for multiple years at Michigan State, even after he left, right? Like that's when you realized how much he was masking and that they were missing on other guys and there wasn't really a lot of development happening. So yes, there is some talent there. And I think Jonathan Smith and his staff are really, really good at like developing players. So I'm less worried.
I mean, they had no outside wide receivers last year. I mean, like he finally got a quarterback. Finally you're just like, he has been, I mean, I'm trying to remember the guy's name that was practically like a walk-on and like threw a bunch of picks. He got that guy into an NFL training camp and all of a sudden, but he didn't have a receiver over like 5'9" last year. And it was a bunch of tight ends and running the football.
He definitely has a better roster than that. Yes. The Aiden Childs thing is fascinating. Like obviously we all, kind of thought he would follow him and do all of that. He's still so young.
Right.
I think he's like still only 18, right? And he's like a team captain at Michigan State. The vibes are actually pretty solid. So we were there. That was part of our spring trip. Tacked it on because we were going to Michigan. And like just super realistic. Like Rossi, Smith, everyone was just like super realistic about what they've inherited, what they were trying to do in year one. I think that Childs will show flashes. I think he's going to be really, really good a year from now.
Yeah.
Like I think that team in year 2 with Jonathan Smith will be the one that like really opens people's eyes. But I think I'm with you on like, they're going to have some moments.
Yeah.
They're going to be better than people think. Because everyone kind of just forgot last season was just such a wash with like everything off the field. And then they were not good on the field either. I think this is going to, I'm very high on them, but I think like they're a year away from being like really in the mix.
Well, they're going to have some holes. I think the interesting thing with them is the idea of like, I think they're going to have, I mean, like with Smith and that offensive staff, you just know they're going to have some games where they're just out scheming you.
Yes.
Right. Like they're just from a pure X's and O's standpoint. Like they are just,
no reason they should be in a game, but they are. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, he will get the most out of, he got the most out of DJU, right? Like, I mean, he put him in a position to, he had some inexplicable stuff, but like he largely put him in a position to be successful at Oregon State. All right. This has been great. You've gone for an hour. I like when I originally started doing these interviews, like I was like, we could do these in 20 minutes. And then I was like, oh my God, these conferences are huge. What have I done?
Yes, they are.
So I appreciate.
We didn't even talk about everybody.
No, it's impossible. Like I'm going to do
Minnesota, Illinois, Northwestern.
I'm going to do 5 minutes on advanced stats on each team. And I'm like counting that up. I'm like, we're already at almost 2 hours. Like that is so much. But anyway, I still appreciate you coming on. Good luck at your new job at NBC Sports. And I'm sure everyone will be able to find you on Peacock, right? As everyone will now have to subscribe to see all the Big Ten games.
Yeah. Peacock and NBC. But yeah, everyone should already be there from the Olympics, right? Like, was everyone not just spending like 12 hours a day watching, like handball and
I got sucked into an immense amount of work. And so I just got to I was like, oh, you apparently Peacock is good now. So yeah.
That's what I was seeing, because my entire Twitter feed did not seem to be working during the Olympics. So I'm sad for you.
Oh, well, that's probably a good thing in Paris. Like finding that your phone doesn't work other than like maybe to take as a camera is probably the best way to consume Paris in my experience. Although the last time I was in Paris, I had horrific food poisoning, which just feels like some like crime against me personally, to get food poisoning in Paris.
In one of the greatest food cities ever.
I know.
I was going to say, like, that was the best part about the Olympics. Like bread and cafe and cheeses everywhere.
I couldn't even make it through Les Invalides. Like I made it to Napoleon's tomb and then I was like, I got to go sit down.
Oh no.
And I was like, I was telling my ex, I was like, before I fell asleep, I was like, here is my insurance information in case you can't wake me up, because that's how bad the food poisoning was. It was terrible.
Oh, that is a terrible trip to Paris.
Yeah, I need to go again and like wipe all of that out of the bad taste out of my mouth. But thank you so much, Nicole. Genuinely appreciate it.
Yep, happy to do it anytime.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, getting to run through all of the super conference teams. And I was like Nicole Auerbach really brought her A game on that interview. I'm excited. We're almost to the season. Like literally the main start of the Saturday is tomorrow. I'm of course getting my homework done very, very late. I don't know. Things went my way at work, which is good, but, not at the right time for getting college football previews out when you hadn't quite gotten on it earlier on. So anyway, let's wrap this up, because I got to do a Big 12 preview like tomorrow morning. Anyway, I'm Rob Bowron, the econometrician behind BetaRank, an advanced stat system for college football. You can find everything you saw and a whole lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com. You can find me at BetaRank FB or at Sharp College Football. We don't have a Pac-12 podcast anymore. You may have heard something about something happening to the Pac-12. And you can find everything in YouTube at Sharp College Football as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you out there soon.